Hey guys, welcome back to Choices Not Chances. Glad you came out and we got another good one for you tonight. Tonight we're going to be sitting and having a chat with Jo Munisteri. She's an intrepid explorer of the inner and outer worlds. Jo is an educator, a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, was a Sundancer, a certified combat analyst, a student of martial arts, an avid hiker, a choreographer and dancer, and a swimmer. Jo's the mother of a son and a daughter, Denali and Sequoia Schmidt, the former wife of the late U.S. Air Force PJ, mountain guide, and climber Martin Schmidt. Jo has nonfiction books in technical writing and research published in New Zealand, Australia, the United States, Pakistan, Russia, India, and Iraq. She publishes her poetry and creative fiction under Jo Patti. She's a graduate from Georgetown University, from the School of Foreign Service, Massey University, and has her diploma from New Zealand, School of Acupuncture and Traditional Chinese Medicine. Tonight we're going to go through it. Jo, welcome to the show. I'm glad that we've connected. I'm glad that you've been patient with scheduling, and I can't thank you enough. I'm humbled and honored to have you on. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, Ryan, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm honored to be on your podcast too.
Well, I like it. If you've seen any of our shows or any of my content, you know that I ask kind of like the basic questions in the beginning. And so I'm just going to start there. I want to know who you come from and where you come from. It helps me try to understand the culture of how you were raised and how you were brought up. So I want to know like parents and siblings and where you started.
An Italian-American family. My father was born in Italy, and my mother's family is from Italy. My background in terms of where I come from is pretty checkered in the sense that because of my father's job, he was a civil engineer, and in the beginning of we moved 13 times before I was 11. I have 4 younger brothers and a younger sister. We were all born in different places in the United States, and one of my brothers was born in Canada. But we moved to Texas in 1964, and I went to public middle school and high school he's a Sicilian man. That family is from Sicily. My mother's family is from Naples. But he was very farsighted in the sense that I was the oldest and a girl, but I still played sports. He had me go to the track he had all of us go to the track as soon as I could run. And that was also partly as kind of self-defense, because in those days there were no anti-bullying protocols. Mm-hmm. And we went to all different schools. And at least if you can run away, you can possibly prevent a fight. Mm-hmm. And there were no real girls' sports teams in high school when I went through high school in Texas. I was in the marching band and always had a lot of work that we did. I had my own little babysitting business when I was 11 or 12. And then I worked in the first 6-in-1 movie theaters. It was a great job to have during high school. I could see all the movies free. Oh, yeah. And then went off when I went to Washington, D.C. for Georgetown University. I was in the judo club. I had a scholarship because of debate. Oh, I guess this is important because it changed my life. I used to, partially because of trauma and I suppose all the moves as well, I used to not be able to really speak well at all. And because of injuries I've had in the last 5 or 6, well, no, longer, I sort of have that again. So coming on podcasts is a big thing for me because I had my jaw wired and a lot of other things. And I'm always self-conscious about that, but I'm trying to get over it. Mm-hmm. But I won nationals as a high school student in debate. I knew I wasn't going to be able probably to get scholarships to go to college on music or sports, but I had a great teacher in 7th grade. At any rate, we had a winning debate team. I got to travel all over the country in my junior and senior year, and I was the first female. These days you have to be careful, to be on the Georgetown Philodemic Society, the debating team, and the National Model United Nations
That's
sort of like
amazing.
a team. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
got to
yeah.
travel all over because of that. And that's how I got into some special programs while I was at the Foreign Service School.
Gotcha. Now, I might have a couple questions about that. Um, your high school debate team,
Hmm.
how was the construct? I debated in high school too, but mine had to go through like our ag core. So do you guys have like a dedicated debate team where you would debate all things? They just give you a topic?
I'm a wee bit older than you, Ryan. So in those days, they hardly had any girls, I'll tell you that. When I went
Sure.
to nationals for CYO, I was not only with the school, but also with the Catholic Youth Organization. So I went to some of the competitions with them. And for example, nationals was in Washington, D.C. that year, and there were only two girls
In the whole
um,
thing.
in the whole. Well, we went by regions, if you won a region, then you went. So I think there were only two at that time. In high school,
Gotcha.
it was very competitive, Memorial High School in Houston. And so you had to try out, just like you had to try it for the band, and marching band was also very competitive. I
Sure.
mean, high school football in Texas, that's second to religion.
Mm-hmm.
um, so yes, you had to, well, in those days, everybody in the United States or all school systems had the same topic. And I made it my sophomore year. I tried out freshman year, and I really didn't get to debate. The second year, starting in sophomore year in high school, yes, I got to debate. And the topic I still remember, it was on the Warren report about the Kennedy
Mm.
assassination and if it was credible or not. So when I was 15, no internet, I was already reading the Warren report and documents, and you had to write out everything for your note cards and take these big cases of file cards to every
Mm-hmm.
debate tournament. I don't know if you had to do that. And
Similar.
yeah, so in that case, yes, you had to be sort of vetted, and there were not, again, very many girls not in debate and extemporaneous and informative speaking. There were
Mm-hmm.
in dramatic speaking and oratory, but
Mm-hmm.
not in the other categories.
Check. Check. That's good. Now, your your issue of coming on podcasts or talking, you said something about your jaw being wired shut. Was that when you were younger or now? Or multiple times?
Actually, multiple times. And the last time I was in rehab, um, I'll explain why in a minute, but the guy in Texas, we like sort of dark humor.
Mm.
I was really injured. I had been run over and attacked. Face had been cut up by knives, and anyway, I had a lot of broken bones, and my jaw was wired shut. And he said to me, "You just can't seem to keep your mouth shut, can you? When will you learn?" Right? Trying to make me laugh, which he did.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, in my life, I've had my parents tried their best, but physical punishment was one of them. So I had my orbital bone on my right side uh, fractured, and my jaw fractured earlier on my life before I was 13. And then I've had injuries when I've been overseas, but actually the worst ones have been in Texas. I was mugged in New York when I was in my 20s. That's why I started taking some martial arts. Because running away wasn't always an option.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but the last time I was actually in training at Fort Leavenworth, I'd come back to pack because we were supposed to go to Fort Polk before we were deployed. And that was when it was a hit and run. It's a long story I don't want to really get into, but
Okay.
uh, I wanted to, I wanted to go back and finish training to deploy. And the way it was, it was around Christmas time, and there weren't many surgeons to do the correct operation. So he did a good enough job that I could speak, but he told me later on I'd probably have to have another operation. And I So I never have gotten another one.
Since you're all set.
And yeah, cosmetically, it knocked out some of the dentine in my teeth and other things. So it's all right. I've learned to mitigate it and navigate it. I just personally get a little self-conscious about it because I know my jaw doesn't close correctly.
If you would have never said anything, I would have never noticed. Just so you know.
Oh,
Just so you know.
thank you.
Never, never would have noticed. Um, my wife just had a tumor removed from her jaw. It was her parotid gland had a tumor on it, so they had to kind of like almost like a facelift and like peel her face over. And she's super self-conscious about the scar, and it was like the same thing. If I'm just looking at her, I can't see it, but I understand that in the inside that feels different to her because she knows that, it's kind of like a painter. Like if you paint your house, every little drop you're going to see and you're going to know it's there and it's going to aggravate you, right? But somebody comes in, didn't paint the house, they're not really seeing any of that. um, but I
Yes, it's like
understand
that.
you are the painter in this situation that knows or feels that. So completely understandable. Now, okay, so I'm getting the cart ahead of the horse here. I got to slow down. Um, Childhood, was religion much of a thing in the house?
Yes.
I remember you said
And
something about Catholic
mhm.
program. So was it Catholic
Oh,
religion in the house?
basically Catholic, definitely, but quite ecumenical in a way because we do have in our ancestry Sephardic Jewish, but they converted years, I mean, generations before.
Mm-hmm.
But we grew up in neighborhoods. I think it's very hard for people these days to understand how ethnically mixed our neighborhoods were. One of the places we lived a lot of the time was New York.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had neighbors who were first generation Polish American, Russian American, French American. We had the Blanches, the Kladzinskis, the Cohens, Greek, the Ganerises, Ryan Kellys, the Irish. And we all played together. In those days, most of the parents, and there were a lot of people with a lot larger families than ours, would just say, go out and play. And we used to have army games, in fact, with codes and everything. Yeah, so we grew up in multi-ethnic. My father, because of his work, he worked in India early on. He worked in Iran. He worked in Pakistan,
What did
and
he do?
he was a civil engineer, designing uh, power plants, refineries.
Mm-hmm.
First, he
Mm-hmm.
was a hard hat in the field, and then he moved up. But he always had a fascination with film, believe it or not, and photography without the sound, but he had the 8 millimeter, I guess it was, films, and he would bring them back of being in the fields in India, for example. They were sleeping in hammocks and they had monkeys. And so I think that's also part of
Sure.
why many of us in our family worked internationally. But yeah, so we were raised Catholic, definitely. Sometimes went to Catholic schools, depending where we were, and sometimes went to public schools. And I know my grandmothers, both of them, but especially my paternal grandmother, was a very spiritual person. She was a physicist,
Mm-hmm.
and then became a teacher, but not just religion per se. We would just talk about, um, yeah, your spiritual purpose in life, your, dare I say, also, we talked about dreams and messages that come into dreams, how dreams
Mm-hmm.
are very important. We would discuss that.
Mm-hmm.
So I did have a background that was rich that way, and I ended up working for a lot of my life and still do with different indigenous groups in different
Mm.
countries. And that's why for me, no matter what religion, if somebody has that spiritual purpose, whether it's Catholic, Buddhist, Jewish, Christian, indigenous religions, um, I can relate. Maybe that's also why the rapport we develop is usually pretty strong quite early on. It's like we sense with each other. We
Mm-hmm.
understand what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I might have more questions on that. But I want to know how you, okay, so we're kind of talking about how you got there. What would you say was the biggest impact between 0 and 20 years of age, that drove your later life?
Oh, well, when I was 19, I won, again, I was the first girl to win the Circumnavigators Fellowship. It was a big competition at Georgetown University.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the requirements that you travel by yourself. And I was not dropped as in parachute, but I was in behind the Iron Curtain in 1973. And I had to be by myself, and there were no cell phones in those days or anything. It was a trial, I know now, because of the programs I was in after that, after I successfully did that. But yeah, going behind the Iron Curtain, especially because in those days, the Vietnam War days, there was also a lot of indoctrination tried on campuses, and they were very communist and Marxist oriented even in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounded very good. But then I had the privilege, you could say, of actually going behind the Iron Curtain when I was 20 years old and seeing that it was all lies. It wasn't like that. And that definitely had a big impact in
Can you
my
maybe
life.
speak to that a little bit more in depth? I want to know. Well, first of all, when you get into this program and you find out that that is what you need to do successfully, or what you have to do to potentially win this thing, how do you set up how did you set that trip up at 19 or 20 years old, 19 years old? How did you set the trip up? The emotions of traveling alone, and then what did you witness that was converse to mainstream dialogue at the time?
Well, the entrance to the competition was academic in the sense you gave them a proposal of why you had to travel around the world. It originally was around the world, but because I was the first girl, they changed it. And the boy that won it with me, he got stuck in Afghanistan in 1973. If you know the history of Afghanistan, he got stuck during the coup, and he wasn't able to go all the way around the world. So in hindsight, I actually had the better
You had the foot
project.
up there, yeah.
uh, I don't think people can understand. I mean, there's no internet. So in those days, you go to the library, you make phone calls. Fortunately, they didn't have all the surveillance. So you could actually go to different agencies and places and go up and ask people. And I was, 5'2" and 95 pounds and didn't look threatening. So a lot of people would let me in and I would talk to them. There was no online ticketing. You went right to all of that you had to do in person. And that we had to do it ourselves. That was part of your capability you had to have. I traveled a lot of my life with my family, but also with the teams in terms of debate team and Model United Nations teams. I was very adept at traveling and packing by the time I was probably 16. So that, I'll talk about the special programs in a minute, but so I planned I did a very ambitious plan. And then because I was a girl and they didn't expect any girls, it was an all male club. They changed my topic for me. They said, we want you to tell us what the role of women is behind the Iron Curtain as perceived by an American contemporary, me. So I talk about it a lot in my first book, Traveling Off the X. The first place I flew into was Bucharest, Romania, under Ceausescu, a very vicious dictator. And right away, my eyes were opened. I was provided with certain people, like the American wrestling team was there at the same time I was, and we shared an interpreter.
Okay.
And then I further went on. Oh, you also had to travel by 5 different means of transportation. They had all these wild things. So,
Transplanes, automobiles,
oh,
boats.
not the usual.
Oh,
By hydrofoil up the Danube, by horse in Finland, by ship from Finland to Russia. hiking, yes, as well as trains and cars, but that really challenged me, but I got through it. And East Germany, when I went through East Berlin, from West Berlin to East Berlin through Checkpoint Charlie, Angela Davis was speaking in East Berlin. And that radicalized me in a different way. I didn't agree with what she was saying. And I saw in a way how she was used, and maybe she didn't realize she was being used.
Who is this again?
Angela Davis.
Okay.
She's you can look her up. She's an African-American, very avowed Marxist, and was responsible for a lot of anti-American propaganda and pro-Soviet propaganda. So in Russia, I explained what happened there. I also was on a ship from the Krupsayaka. They booked me on a Russian ship from Finland to Russia, and the ship, the way it was run was very military. I mean, you couldn't sleep in past 5:30. They woke you up. You had exercises on deck.
As a
It was a
passenger?
good, as a passenger.
I love it. That's awesome.
And I look back now, knowing what I know, and there was definitely no coincidences. But at that time, I thought, oh, what a great coincidence. There's this British woman who met me and befriended me. It was only a few days' journey. But we had a conversation on deck one night that went on probably for 6 hours or 7 hours. And I look back now and I go, oh, yeah, I don't think that was a coincidence. Just like certain people that I met. And so the other thing is I was supposed to bring an envelope and not look at what it contained. And I didn't look, but I was used as a courier. That was fine.
Gotcha.
And then it
sounds like agency related work to me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I describe in my first book some of the techniques. I'm sure they're not so different that were used in those days to seek, recruit. Yeah, but when I came back, I definitely was changed in my whole perspective, and I was changed about who I wanted to work for and who I didn't want to work for. And I have never, I've only worked as an asset, I'll say it, yeah, an asset. I never wanted to work as an officer, either Foreign Service or other agencies. I've helped them. In case anybody who knows me would go, that's not true. I've helped them when it was, especially during HRT situations, and I had it in that other people wouldn't. Just a little piece of, just an ordinary person that helps because I have certain skills and certain training and certain access, especially as an older woman, not a younger woman in these countries. Yeah, so
nice. Okay.
But then I was okay. So then when I got through that, all of a sudden.
Hold on. I just want to. Yeah. I'm sorry. I just want to understand. Make sure that I'm understanding this right. This around the world trip was a school program. No. Model UN.
No.
No.
It was an outside club called the Circumnavigators Club. It's still in existence. It's changed a bit in its character. They've allowed women in, and once I successfully finished this scholarship and traveling with all their requirements, after that, I did prove that a girl could do it. So after that, then they did have girls in the categories.
Okay, so this is a program that you went into that, if completed successfully, you earn a scholarship to a different...
No, you get a scholarship, a fellowship, to travel around the world, everything paid for, according to your report. I reported back to the United Nations, as a matter of fact, in September 1973. And the day that I was reporting in the club room that they had at the United Nations was the day the bells went off for a Middle East war in 73. So that also impacted my life because shortly thereafter, I ended up working in the Middle East. So you can look back in your life sometimes and go, oh, there's a synchronicity to it. At the time, you didn't see it. My concentration at Georgetown was the Middle East.
Okay. Okay, so next question. I'm sorry, I just want to chronologically.
No, I sometimes I take for granted people know these things and they don't. And when I write in the book, I can write more details, but speaking, sometimes part of me self-censors. So go ahead and ask. I can answer a question, but I can't always volunteer the information.
Check. Okay, so this program to the circumnavigate group is affiliated with the United Nations, and you did that before, during, or after college?
No, it was my junior year, after the summer of my junior to senior year.
In Georgetown?
Yeah, in Georgetown.
Okay.
In fact,
Okay,
Georgetown was one of the few universities that received this fellowship. Now it's with many more universities. It's still going on. It's those people in the Circumnavigators Club, especially then in the 70s, they're all very big power players in different aspects of life, be it business, diplomats, former military, etc. It was all male club. Now, after that, I was invited to special dean's seminars. You have to understand, at that time at Georgetown, we had seminar leaders like Henry Kissinger. He was one of them. And Alexander Haig, he was my mentor. And I was in a special program. I was the only girl and the only undergraduate to be put in the first courses that they had for psychocybernetics.
Now,
and then,
what is that?
It's a precursor and part of, I mean, later on in my life, I worked, in PSYOP. It was, it's different than what people have it now as a kind of psychology. In that time, it was me and then 5 graduate students, all male. We had General Haig, Dr. Mesior, he was the head of psychology department, and used to be, it was with the first CIA, and he was an amazing man, a psychologist who had worked behind the lines. I believe originally he was either German or Austrian. I think he spoke 5 languages. He was a specialist in hypnosis, and I underwent that program. I was chosen for that program using hypnosis. Yeah. As one
I always wondered if it was even real.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds like it's pretty real. Okay.
Yeah. Not how people think. I described it a little in my first book.
Okay. I'm gonna have to get your first book and maybe have another recording with you. So I can understand.
So we had Dr. Christakis, Alexander Christakis, physicist, and I believe he's still alive on Crete. We had Dr. Jack Schumann, more professionals. I won't say they weren't just professors. They were all still working with different organizations.
And they were all affiliated with that club?
Not the club. No, this is through Georgetown.
Oh, this is at Georgetown.
Yeah, this is at Georgetown in the basement. In those days, and those. I've done a lot of training in basements. Actually, it's pretty funny. Training. Yeah, including in Kansas and outside Fort Leavenworth at one point. Yeah, so that training then introduced me to other people and other possibilities, and shortly thereafter. And also, I had my radio engineering license. I worked at the radio station there, and I was taken to the Pentagon and introduced to people. I was, at the time, I didn't understand, like I would go to a big feature of that era in DC was the parties, especially the parties at Georgetown. And there were only a couple of us girls that would be invited sometimes to these parties. I describe it in the book what they try and compromise you at those parties. Luckily, I had a very good extended family. Some of them former military, Marines, Navy mostly, but one of my uncles was in Battle of the Bulge in the Army, and then afterwards in intelligence. One of my other uncles was in naval intelligence. And I had been warned also by some of the older girls at Georgetown about some of the tactics to be aware of. And
Tactics
so
for
I was,
what?
how they compromise you early on.
Mm-hmm.
Even a debate, when we were up at Harvard for a debate contest, you know, they in some of these Model United Nations also, they would invite you, they'd have you stay in very fancy hotels in different places. And then fortunately, I never really drank in my life, but for people who were susceptible to that, they would have an open bar. And even if you weren't 21, you know, they'd be offering you drinks and they'd spike the drinks. And then you're compromised early on. Those are the tactics even in the 70s. You can imagine what they are now. So, but I was warned against that. And I took that advice seriously. And when I came back from the Middle East the first time, I decided I didn't want to have any part of being an officer in any of those organizations. I would work as a contractor later on in my life because in some ways you're never really out. I'll tell you that. But I wanted to go away from it completely. So
You say why? Can you get into why?
I saw the tactics early on. I mean, for a good part of my life, when I was trying to tell people what was really going on in some of these organizations, and nobody wanted to, only the people who were themselves subjected to it either would say, don't ever talk about it. Luckily, I'm not under any NDAs from that time.
Sure.
But some of the hypnosis and those techniques are pretty powerful. I had to go through a lot to untune them in terms of compartmentalization and what you don't say. But those, I just saw people change. People I knew change. Throughout my career, I've seen that. You know, some people are easily seduced, tempted by what is still known as the acronym in intelligence, and it's pretty well known now because people put everything on the internet. But in those days, not so many people knew it. It was memorized as mice. That what compromises a person or what can turn a person or make a person an asset is money, ideology, you're compromised, or your ego, or a combination of those. And so I saw people change and their principles completely go away or mostly go away. And I didn't want to be one of those people. If you're ambitious.
Why did they change? Because of the work?
Well, they changed because of the work, because what they were tasked to do, and they wanted to move up the ladder, so the ethics of it didn't matter. They changed because they were compromised, and that threat, just like the threat of the mafia or other criminal networks, it's always over you. And if you have a family, then it's over you and your family. They saw what happened to other people. I've had a lot of colleagues and friends die suspiciously, let's just put it that way, or outright, I knew it was an inside job, and were assassinated, bicycle accidents, car accidents, suicide where they shot themselves in the back of the head, those kinds of things that just warn people off right away, or they get out. I just saw also a lot of, especially later in my career, when you're older, you can see a lot of these things. I just saw a lot of predation and a lot of people would succumb to it.
Mm-hmm.
Drugs, alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
sex, etc. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of ways people can be controlled, especially if they're ambitious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a fact. Did So when you decide you don't want to do that work anymore, or at least you don't want to be an officer, you decide that it's still okay to be a contractor and be an asset. No?
No, I completely went away from it.
Oh, okay.
I applied for Circle in the Square professional theater school in New York. I'd always been dancing. And as part of Georgetown, my last years, I was part of the Georgetown Classical Theater, helping in directing, but also acting.
Mm-hmm.
And a few of us put on theatrical productions. And my boyfriend at the time and I really working on our auditions for Circle in the Square in New York. At that time, it was very difficult to get in, and we both got in. And I changed my profession completely. I mean, some of the skills I learned there have helped me later in my life, but yeah, so I was in all the medium at different points, mostly the theater, and worked with experimental theater in New York, people that are known now, but at the time they weren't known. I worked with the Performing Garage and Creation Productions, people like Willem Dafoe, Ron Vauder, lots of people came out of that time, you know, before they were well known. And I worked in different regional theaters and worked and then I got, it has happened a couple of times in my life, I got seriously injured. I got mugged in New York. I was there before Giuliani cleaned it up.
Mm-hmm.
And neck injuries, head injury, ear injury, which affected my balance for turns, especially.
Mm-hmm.
So I changed my profession to be a choreographer, and I choreographed both theater and dance.
No
I worked
way.
I worked with Sam Shepard. I worked with Wendy Wilson, lots of people, and I had a job at San Jose Rep in San Jose Cleveland Ballet. That's how I moved from New York to California, and I met Marty when he wasn't in the theater. He was still in the PJs, but I met him when I was in California. I was living in a house in Santa Cruz, even though I worked in San Jose for San Jose Rep and San Jose Cleveland Ballet.
Mm-hmm.
But the guys in the house on the floor below, they were all Air Force. Marty didn't live there, but that's how I met him through them.
Gotcha. Tell me about Marty. What wooed you?
Oh, he was just one of the most.
His what?
He was one of the most different people I had ever met. I think it's fair to say everybody who really knew him knew he was an absolute extrovert. He was, and even though I was on the theater and everything, I never was. That was my way to express myself, like poetry and dance, express myself, but not as an extrovert. When I met him, I think I described this, maybe I didn't describe it in my book. He was wearing what he used to call Jerusalem Nikes, which were these sandals he had made. He was very good with his hands. I mean, he could do everything: carpentry, sewing. Yeah, but he and his friends asked me to go with them to a movie. I still remember the movie. It was called Brother from Another Planet. We used to like to go to sort of independent films. And that's how I met him, because they told me, look, we have this guy from New York, because I just come from New York. Because usually I wouldn't go out with them because I was really busy. We had 8 shows a week, and Monday I only had a certain time off. It's a repertory theater. Anyway, they told me he was from New York. As soon as I saw him, I knew he wasn't from New York. Turns out he had just been visiting in New York, but that was the in to get me to go with them. That's how we met. We went out there were 6 of us that went out, 5 guys and myself. Yeah, we went out to see this movie and we were both laughing at the same things in the movie. So that was sort of like, oh, okay, this guy is on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
And yeah, then I got introduced to climbing and skiing and all sorts of things I wasn't supposed to do because I had a very strict contract. You were like a product in those days with the theaters you were with.
Okay.
They didn't want you to break anything. You know,
Yeah.
you couldn't change your hair the way you wanted to or anything. So
Yeah.
we sort of I had to sneak when we went snow camping and we weren't even allowed to go water skiing.
So
They thought
he introduced you to all
a
of
lot of
the.
those extreme sports as other kind of sports. Yeah, he did. And we used to run 5 kilometer, 10 kilometer races together. And then I introduced him to meditation because I was doing Zen meditation and other kinds of meditation. And he came with me to a retreat. It was pretty funny because they had a race there up a mountain. It was called a no race because there was no winner. You know, it's very Zen-like thing.
Everybody loses here.
Well, no one's a winner, you know, it's a Zen race. But he couldn't help himself, of course. So he won the race, you know, they were all laughing. I mean, he was just a very forceful too character. And that's how we met. Yeah, that's how we met.
That's awesome. Now, you got okay. So when you guys meet, you continue to spend a lot of time together, as he's a PJ.
Yeah, he's still in the PJs then. And I got also introduced to that world. He had never, I don't think he'd ever been in the theater before he met me. And he used to, you know, come see some of my shows and he was pretty critical of the whole social scene. I was obligated to go under my contract. I had to go to certain parties for fundraising. I had to wear makeup and all these kinds of clothes, and he never liked that, I would say. But I mean, he liked it to a bit, but you know, he would say, oh, why do you have to talk to those people? And I said, because they're giving money to the theater and that's my contract. But he was also thinking of getting out. That was in his last 2 years. And he always wanted to be a mountain guide. He had started climbing when he was 13 or 14, and I encouraged him. I've never talked about this publicly, but people know. In spite of using 2 forms of birth control, I got pregnant. So there was never any question in my mind that at that age, you know, of course I would keep the child, but that was the impetus to get married. And it was also the impetus for me to really look at my life and what I needed to do to change it so that it would be best for children and not just for me. And I was offered a job in Australia. I had been there before I met Marty. That's another story. Worked with the Aboriginal community there. They invited me back and I decided to go. I thought, well, I was right, that it would be better for me and for my child. I pretty much knew it was a son from the beginning. I just have always known about my children even before they were born and before they had ultrasounds. I knew my family would absolutely, and they still did throughout his life, castigate me and my son. And because I was marrying into a German, I found out later, Nazi family, and they were anti-fascisti and, you know, absolutely, both families didn't like each other. It was very hard in all sorts of ways. But anyway, moving to Australia, and then we got married in Australia shortly before Denali was born.
So he got out of the PJs and went with you.
No, he didn't go with me. He got out at the end of the summer of 1987. He then started training to be a mountain guide, the first big mountain he did other than in Alaska, because he had stationed in Alaska for part of his time and did a lot of climbing there, but it was Argentina, Aconcagua. Okay. So he went to Argentina to be an assistant guide. in Argentina, and I went to Australia, and I wasn't sure I was going to marry him even then, honestly, because he had certain traits, and I think anybody who really knew him, that he didn't change, that I knew were going to be very difficult if I was married to him. I mean, to put it charitably, he had a roving eye, a girl in every port sort of mentality, and some other things, and I knew he's a very forceful guy, and I thought I could change him, but no, you should never go into those relationships thinking you're going to change them. And I had pushback from other members of my family who I did confide in. And, if I hadn't married him, we would never had our daughter either, Sequoia. I mean, there's things in life you look back and you go, gosh, it was so hard. But on the other hand, other events and happenings in your life wouldn't have happened had you not made this decision. Sure. So we got married in Australia. He came over after Argentina, and we got married. Our son was born, and he left 1 week after he was born to go guide in some other countries. No, that was the Alaska season. Our life revolved around his seasons. And while most people would go maybe 1 or 2 seasons, 1 season in the Himalayas and then maybe 1 in Europe, Denali in Alaska or Europe, then Marty would do as many seasons as he could. And that's part of the reason we moved to New Zealand, because in New Zealand, of course, it's the Southern Hemisphere. So he could have another season in the New Zealand Alps.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
He was about it, huh?
Yeah. And
I bet it was good, though.
Oh, you can look up online. Yeah, he was, by the end of his life, even before, he was a world-renowned, that's when he wanted to be, mountain guide and climber, and just good at all sports. He just had a natural ability, as do most, both of my children have that ability, fortunately. And yes, as we were talking about before we recorded this, when you have such a lofty goal, you want to be, there's no best guide, by the way. It's just like in dancers, there's not really any best. It depends, it's quite subjective, but if you want to have to be at a certain level, especially in the mountains, because it's, that kind of guiding on Everest, on K2, where he and our son ended up, dying. You have to commit yourself full on, and he did that. And I was willing to support that, honestly. I knew he was going to be gone, and that was all right. My father was gone a lot of the time when I was growing up. I haven't talked about this, but I think it might be helpful in this community. I had one guideline that he never really followed that caused one of the reasons that caused our divorce, which is if he did things that he shouldn't have done, at least be honest with me. Mm-hmm. I received some letters from different women at different times, and I found out through other people, and that's the worst thing, if somebody's lying to you and gaslights you about that, and then you find out, and terrible for the children. Yeah, it's in those days, the 90s to the early 2000s, it was a different culture in the special operations community and ex-special operations, and the mountain guiding community is even more so. Even more so at that level. I know, because I was around it for a long time. And they become sort of like gods in that community, and they think they can do anything. And yeah, it doesn't make for, I don't know any of those guides during that time. Gary Ball, Rob Hall, they're all dead now. Those guys that were around, I forget what French guy, we went to France in the Alps, I met him, and I thought, oh gosh, this is just, he's talking about his wife and how crazy and horrible she is. And I thought, oh, this is what they do. They just say that their wives don't support them and she's a bitch. And no, it's not that. It's they want to have their cake and eat it too. And yeah, so it was like that. And then our values became very different. I changed my career. I started my Waldorf teacher training. I finished when I was pregnant with my second child with Sequoia. I went into education. I went seriously into education and health. I'm glad I did.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could be with the children in the school. I was teaching in the same schools they were for a good part of all through their elementary and for my son up until middle school. And then we were New Zealand citizens because of my job, not because of Marty's. I was invited to be the choreographer for the National Maori Dance Company in 1989, and with a promise of devoting 3 years to them and gaining them more international platforms, including they performed at the Atlanta Olympics and they performed at the America's Cup. Oh, wow. And other, got them to that standard that after that they granted us citizenship. And my children, Denali was born in the Gumbaynggirr Aboriginal population where I was working, and we have family still there. And my daughter was born in the Ngāti Kahungunu Iwi tribal area. And so my daughter, my son, and I were all adopted formally into both those tribes, but my husband wasn't. They saw a lot of things. Well, they saw a lot of things, I think, earlier than I did about that they weren't going to be harmonious with the way their beliefs and how they lived.
You know what's interesting about, I don't know why this popped into my head when you said that, but I had a very heavy appreciation for a lot of the tribes where I fought at. The tribes people were really good people, like the ones that weren't Taliban or the ones that weren't Al-Qaeda or wherever I was at, right? And I liked that about them. I found them to be very family oriented, very, even their extended family, very oriented in a way that we're not really in the West anymore, at least, in general. And so I always liked that about them. Very, whatever. I guess that would be it, family oriented. So
I was very fortunate because, see, I could have my children with me when I'm working both with the Aboriginal tribes and Maori tribes. I could breastfeed both my children. In fact, if they were crying, they go feed them, then come back and do the teaching or the choreography. And I had a lot of women around me from those that became family, still are. We adopted a Aboriginal, one of the families I was very close to, and she had her son, Gerara, in the same 8-bed rural hospital in Australia as I did with Denali. They were only born a couple of hours apart, and she was like my sister. She just died this year, and she had a much harder life than I. She lost a number of her children. And that's also how I got involved originally in working with Link Up. I don't know if you know, I don't usually put that, but I started working then with finding stolen children.
Okay.
So.
And what year was that? 89, 90?
Yeah, 89 it started.
What does that look like?
Some people may have seen the movie Rabbit Proof Fence. Have
Okay.
you seen it?
Mm-mm.
It's an important movie. In fact, at the end, they actually.
Rabbit Proof Fence?
There's a British actor, Kenneth Branagh. It's not a well-known movie, but it's sort of a docudrama of some of the tactics used. Well, I'll say I also worked in finding Native American children too, and other children in different times in my life. It's just a gift, you could say, that I've had early on. It's not everybody that comes to me and asks me, it's just certain cases I've been able to be successful as one of the people that helps find them, or definitely found a number of them myself. The Rabbit Proof Fence is about the policy. Many Americans don't know it, that was in existence until the late 80s, early 90s, really. The White Australia policy, and the policy that when the British came to Australia, it was called terra nullius, meaning no people there. There were people there, Aboriginal, but they never considered them people. They didn't get their right to vote and their full rights until the 1980s in Australia. Most people don't know that. And they had a policy that they copied from the Nazis. Well, no, the Nazis copied for them. I'm sorry. The white paper was before then. They went to Australia because Australia was so successful and pretty much, well, going from a population of 100% Aboriginal in the 1700s to less than 2% by the early 1900s. And they had a lot of ways of doing that. And one of the ways that continued until just recently was kidnapping their children, like they did in Canada and the United States, and taking them to mostly Anglican, well, all different kinds of Christian sect places where they would forbid them to speak their language, forbid them to be with their parents or any contact, and make them into slaves, essentially, and denigrate their own traditions and religion, spiritual practices. And many of them died in the service there. And many of them never knew where they really came from. So after I proved myself to certain tribal elders, and some of the elders also had given me certain, I don't want to say training exactly, instructions of how to do things, how to look at things. I was, at that time, the only non-Aboriginal person working with Link Up Aboriginal Corporation, which was a group of, at that time, started in the 80s, Aboriginals who formed their own, they called it a corporation, but their own organization to find other Aboriginal, to find where they came from, to find what happened. Because how I originally got involved is who was like my sister. I won't say her name because a lot of her family's still alive. Sorry, I just thought about her.
It's okay. Please.
Her sister had been taken. They used to go to the child protection agencies. You know, they would go in these big black cars to the mission because a lot of Aboriginals had to live on what were like reservations. They were called missions. And they would steal. One of the tactics was, let's say they had a family of 8, they would steal 2 or 3 and then hold the threat over the rest of the family. If they said anything or did anything, they would take the rest. They'd use terrible tactics. Anyway, they had stolen her sister when she was young. And so she asked me to go talk to her mother to try and find her. This is one of the better stories because we ended it up finding her many years later in Holland. She had been sort of sold to an orphanage and then gone to Holland and brought her back. But by that time, she was in her late 30s. You know, she had been taken when she was 6. Yeah, so that's how I originally started. That was one of the first cases. Unfortunately, you know, we find, or lamentably, we'll find what happened to some of these children, and most of them, I'd say 80% that we found them eventually were dead and had been dead a long time. But at least the family knew what happened. They were taken from the hospitals as soon as they were born, where I was in Maxville. I ended up being right in the heart of all this. I didn't know that when we moved there, but the nurses were complicit. The Catholic Church was complicit. The social services was complicit. They would they'd hold these Christmas parties and identify these children they wanted to take, or the new babies that would be born. This happened at the hospital where the Aboriginal woman would come in to have their babies. And after they had their baby, they were told, you know, they'd go to another bed in another room. They said, we'll bring your baby to you later. And then the mothers would say, well, where's my baby? And they'd say, some of them, they said, your baby died. Well, where's the body? Oh, no, sorry, we've already taken them. And you have to understand, they were so oppressed, so bowed down, they didn't dare question. and they were told to go home. And all of those babies that were taken had been, I would say adopted out, but adopted's too nice a word. They'd been sold out, and many of them died because they were worked to death, and they never knew who their parents were. And of course, the post-trauma of those women also, and we found one of also these girls, going crazy. The mother going, "What happened to my child?" Or some of them were told, "You never had a child."
What?
Yeah, they used all these psychological horrible on the Aboriginal women. Yeah. So so then I worked with them for a very long time, and found children in the United States, all over, as well as in different parts of Australia.
Do you think that the United States government is complicit in any of this? Because there's like a lot of young Mexican immigrants that are just missing. And it's not like some, it's like a shitload. And then it always just seems to be this, like to me, like this evil fucking app that runs in the background of the city on the hill. And I don't understand it. Like anybody that gets close to reporting on it can't report everything, or we don't have names, or we can't have proof, but it really feels that way to me.
It's the most dangerous profession to be in. If you want to, I learned that early on. You're correct. I won't go into details. I've known this since the 70s. Mm-hmm. And I've just had so many colleagues or colleagues of colleagues, because it's best if we don't know who everybody is exactly, who have died in the service of trying to expose this. One fairly recently, she was an ex-police officer, Jenny Flowers. She was known as Task Force. She was on the net a lot before her death, so I could say her name, who try and expose this. And I feel like it's a relay, that once you work in this, you hand the torch on to somebody else, because it's an ongoing battle that we've been losing on a spiritual and physical level. I always said earlier on, the war on terror should be the war on terror on children, because that's been the agenda for quite some time. And it's a very dangerous field to be in. That is one thing, Marty really didn't support me working in this once I had sort of a gift and started working on it. He said it was more dangerous than his job. In a way, it was true. On the other hand, if no one does it, what's going to happen? And I believe, and I would say that my colleagues who have died for it would believe, especially of a spirituality, that there's other realms than just this earth, and other realms after you die in this physical earth, that if that's your task, don't be foolish about it, and be very careful about who you work for, because I've been in the position, even fairly recently, in Iraq a couple of years ago, where I was trying to report to the consulate there or to the local police in different places about something we had absolute evidence and can prove, and then you find out that the people that you would be reporting to are also involved. And that's a very serious situation to be in, especially overseas, where they can get rid of you like that under another pretext. But and also people who have, I know some people have to come out online these days to get their money. I really respect the Deliver Fund, for example. I think they do very conscionable work, but a lot of the best people, most effective people in different parts of the world, in Asia, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Central America. You'll never see them on a website. They can't be on a website because then they couldn't be effective. And people have to be very careful who's asking to join them on their teams. And some of the most, attractive, bubbly, I really want to help girls and women end up, I've had personal experience, end up working for a criminal network or the other side. And they're the infiltrators into your organization. So that's why I've always worked with very trusted people and very small teams, although even we have sometimes been fooled. And the consequences are absolutely horrific for the people involved, for the children involved. Yeah.
I don't understand it. I mean, this is something, it's not something I talk about on my platform, or haven't yet talked about on my platform, but that's something that I care deeply, deeply, deeply about, and I've done. I'm nowhere near what you've done. I haven't done anything like that, but my research into it and communicating with some of my circle, let's say, I just don't understand. I don't understand the incentive. If the incentive is money, I just can't imagine you would do that for money.
Well, I think anybody who has a fairly normal upbringing, what normal is, but fairly healthy outlook on life and has any sort of moral beliefs in terms of Judeo-Christian, most people, you don't murder, you don't lie, you don't steal. Those are not things you do. But there are quite a few people that don't have that. There's quite a few children now, generations of, that's what I talk about in my Small Wars Journal series on jihadi generations, strategies used for weaponizing children. Criminal gangs do it too. And no, most people, fortunately, I guess you'd say, can't understand that. But if somebody's so twisted, the whole paradigm of what they think is good is very different than yours.
Yeah, it is.
And somebody that can deliberately and put it online. I mean, the darknet, we had to go on the darknet for a lot of our research investigations, or trying to find. I mean, the way we found one whole family that had been taken in New York, and this is in the late 70s, when they were making snuff tapes on videotapes. The way we found one family was from those tapes. I really feel for the people in law enforcement, the earnest people, the ethical people who work in this, who have to now go through, you get post-trauma from just looking at that stuff. But that's the way they have to find some children. And they found this whole family because they finally found the tape. And you see also now, well, for quite a while, people will pay to watch, like the Hunger Games and these other movies that come out. They're kind of an exaggeration of what already exists. And doctors are involved a lot of times for money, but how could you amputate a child's legs so they can't run away from their predator, knowing that you're doing that even for money? But there are people, sometimes in places like Albania and other countries, they'll get these doctors, they'll compromise them in medical school, they'll threaten their family, and I don't know, what would you do in that situation, and they say, come and you're going to take the blood from this person, or you're going to cut off their whatever from that person. And then some of it's satanic, or these cults that abound in certain countries more than others. And we have a lot of those people that are in the United States now, come through open borders. So they don't have the same thinking we do at all.
Yeah.
It is a lot of money for money, yes, but a lot of it isn't. A lot of it is a belief. Yeah.
I I didn't. When I was at war, I didn't mind killing the right people or what I perceived as the right people. I didn't struggle as long with that as I struggled with the moral injury of what I witnessed that culture do to its kids.
Mm-hmm.
Mentally disabled children with steel collars on like a pit bull puppy and 3 feet of rope, staked to a ground in a country where the sun comes up and it gets 140 degrees with a little bowl of slop like a pit bull puppy because he had pigmentation issues on his skin.
Mm-hmm.
And it rocked me in a way that I wasn't prepared for. I was prepared to shoot people in the face. I was prepared to deal with children that maybe were collateral damage in women, and I was prepared for that. I felt like I'm prepared for that. I wasn't prepared for a 6-year-old to be offered to me as a sexual slave from his father, and I wasn't prepared to watch grown people have intercourse with animals every single night instead of their families. And I was not prepared for that culture psychologically of what the things that were okay to them and the extreme lack of value placed on human life in different places than the United States and other
Yes.
modernized countries. That stuff fucked with me in my head far more than killing. Less probably than losing my men, but far more than killing. So I think
Yes, you have a
I think a
culture
moral
of
injury is worse.
yeah, bachabazi. You know what bachabazi is, right? That's the boy dances the boy trade.
Mm-hmm.
But that is part of their culture. You have a dichotomy where you want to
Should you try
respect
to
their
change
culture,
somebody's
but
culture, right?
should you change genital mutilation that they do to girls in many countries?
Cutting the breast off and such, or
Well,
worse.
cutting their clitoris off so they can't have any pleasure in sex.
Mm-hmm.
You also have the way they train. I know this from treating patients and refugees in New Zealand who would tell some of the things that had happened to them in training. And one of the, I think I can talk about this. Yeah, some of the Iraqis, one had been Uday's driver, if you know who Uday was,
Yeah.
right? Their whole mechanic crew was in New Zealand at one point. They had escaped to New Zealand, by the way. And was telling me that the way they trained him, I trained a couple of them, I guess were in the same unit that had come across through Indonesia, was when they were driving, Uday would go up to the Kurdish area and tell them to stop the car if they saw a woman that they wanted, and kidnap the woman, bring them in, rape them in all sorts of ways, tape their mouth, and strip them in front of the training class. You'd have a training class in the military, and they would have to cut their breasts off and do other things to them. Mm-hmm. And of course, that completely dehumanized these guys.
100%.
But people don't want to talk about it, and I don't think it should be talked about necessarily in public. And maybe should put a warning: no children should be listening to this
I
one.
do
but
already. Yeah.
okay, yeah. The kind of training that they do is the more you can't even imagine. It's like hell on earth what some people have been subjected to before they die, and then some people have been subjected to in order to become the warriors, the jihadi warriors, or
Well, a lot of those kids that get snatched out of tribes will be taken and put into like boot camps, and a lot of their, I don't say a lot of their, I know personally, and friends of mine know, some of their final training for desensitizing these children is they'll have a prisoner or somebody else that they snatched, a grown man, or 2 or 5 or 7 inside a house bound up where they can't get away, and those are the targets. Instead of like my Marines over here on Lejeune are shooting E-type plastic targets with faces on it for their desensitivity training, and these 13-year-olds that they're going to fight in 10 years, are going in and executing men and watching that and seeing that and understanding the sounds and the sights, and they're doing it at a young age,
Yes, that's their graduation, and they videotape it. I talk about it in my articles. They videotape it for a couple of reasons. One is to use for training for other children. It's usually at 11 or 12, maybe 13.
Mm-hmm.
They do it on real men,
Mm-hmm.
right? Different ways. But the other is to show them that they cannot go back.
Mm-hmm. Almost to hang it over their head.
Not only that, but if you see as a 13-year-old going through puberty yourself doing this, and you've done it, yeah, it can be a threat, that they have. We can show that you killed this person, right? You're always beholden to us, like a mafia tactic, or
Mm-hmm.
But the other is, it's a kind of imprinting in their neurological systems. I do this. This is what I do. For God, this is what I do.
Mm-hmm. And that probably makes it harder for them to square it away or compartmentalize the fact that they actually did that if they're constantly reminded of it, either in training or videos or whatever, I would assume.
Yeah.
Kind of like, yeah, I assume so. Yeah, it's sickening. That's sickening that kids have to go through that. It's sickening that anybody would have to go through that. But the fact that the market is so high for that stuff means that it's not just some people that are interested in it. It means that there's a lot of people that are interested in it.
There are millions of views of not only porn, but violent porn, snuff porn, whatever you call it. And you have to ask yourself, who is the biggest consumer of that? Do you know?
Mm-mm.
Americans.
Imagine that.
Not Thai, yeah. This is why I say, I've said to other people, we have to look at ourselves and our society and what we're allowing to happen, what we're allowing to flourish.
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. And what it seems like to me is we have almost, it's like you were talking about before, if somebody doesn't do it, then nobody does it. Somebody has to do the work, but it almost feels like we have a side that is perpetuating the darkness, and then we have a side that doesn't even want to look to know that the darkness is real, and then we have a super tiny spot that said, no, that darkness is real, and we have to extinguish that with light. We have to, or it's just going to take over everything. And then it's like, well, like if the side trying to extinguish it is vastly smaller, and the side that is burying their head in the sand, pretending that it's not real, is vastly larger, like how do you... It's almost like you need a complete upheaval to reset thinking, or to, and like I'm not suggesting that to anybody to do anything crazy, but I am saying, like, at some point it may get to a spot where it needs reset, where it needs where people need to be reminded why we got here, how we got here, and the fact that America has been the largest power with the most opportunity to tyrannize its minority without tyrannizing its minority. That's great, but it might not be that anymore if we don't stop some of the stuff that is completely provable that is happening here that nobody's talking about. You're talking about it. Mel Gibson and some of those people had shined some light on it over the last couple of years with theater and making movies to notify regular Americans what's going on. I think that over the last 5 years, you've seen Hollywood just really get exposed for a lot of stuff. You have this Diddy issue going on right now, which sounds like there were kids involved there to me, at least at the time that it was going on. Here's a question for you that's completely, maybe not even called for, but do you think that people like Diddy are controlled assets? Because it seems like to me that like the Jeffrey Epsteins of the world got dirt on every one of those leverage power players, big power players. And then you get somebody like Diddy who could control or demand at least high influence over a huge population of American youth and of Hollywood and of entertainment business. Like, wouldn't it be nice to have that asset and just keep his shit sealed and let him do whatever he wanted to do in his freak off parties? And now I have film and footage coming to me of leveraged power players that I can now leverage. Some of that seems like governmental to me. Some of the psyops and shit that you see going on in America seems like shit that we train people to do to our enemies. And it's like, at some point, people are going to put that together, start asking the right people questions, or maybe they don't because they disappear when they do.
I suppose it depends on your world and spiritual view too. It is I won't even say understanding. My deep belief is this is a spiritual battle as well as just a physical economic battle, for example. And when you say is somebody, I won't even say who it is, I mean, the names that we hear are Jeffrey Epstein and Diddy, but you don't think there's even more powerful? Yeah, absolutely there are. And I won't name them because I want to live a long time still. But the way I describe it to some people is I do it in movies because most people, that's the vernacular they understand these days, films. If you've seen the David Craig Bond films where he talks about Spectre and it's in everything. I don't know if you've seen those James Bond series, the newest ones. Not the last one, but the one that starts with the Day of Death in Mexico, for example.
Okay, maybe, yeah.
Okay, and they talk about how Spectre is everywhere. It's already everywhere. That is how a lot of the networks are. But I think people are also it's too easy to say it's government agencies per se. Well, it is, but it's bigger than that. It's bigger than that on a physical level in terms of control. You don't need very many people to control the masses. We've already seen that throughout history, including recent history with the COVID restrictions. But you do, that person or that small group of people or the small group of families do need money and power to have the leverage. And some people don't want to believe, but there's also, a very dark side, spiritual power, if you will, whether you call it Luciferic or satanic, that these people use, just like people use the armor of God. They use it in the other way. And when I was both Sundancing, I was a Sundancer, which that's my spiritual warrior training as well, and working with Aboriginal and other indigenous societies, given the best way to describe it is this: you may have a gift to do this, all right? You may have, let's say, a gift to find people or sense what darkness is. But it can be electricity without a ground. You have to have a ground, and that's why the warrior training from ancient Chinese to ancient Greek involves a lot of discipline of your mind and body. Most people don't want to do that. But they don't realize, that was the great thing about Joseph Campbell being involved with the Star Wars series. It was trying to show you in a way people could understand on a almost fairy tale level, but take in, especially children, the dark side. Be aware of the dark side. The dark side exists. There's many different realms in the universe, let alone just on our Earth. And if you think you're going to go against them unprepared, it'd be just like, okay, maybe you could run into a firefight without any body armor or weapons and you'd be okay.
But probably not.
Maybe you think that because you've watched some movies and you think you're going to just, let's just say there are miracles, there are definitely miracles. But 99.9% of the time, no, you need the training, you need the armor, you need the support. It's the same thing in this battle, if not even more. And when you have the media, which now with the tech tools we have is so sophisticated. I mean, the advertising, the films, the curriculum in schools, the screens, which neurologically are addicting children early on. They have to have it. They get anxiety attacks if they don't have their iPad. You know, it takes a lot of conviction and courage on parents' parts to say, I'm not going to use those tools because those tools are portals to diminishing the strength my child might have of their own senses and spiritual well-being. How many people, military community won't like me calling out on this. I talk about it in my second book a little. When I was on HKIA, and even with some of the refugees, one of the first things that they want when they get into the West is they want porn. And as soon as they started allowing external hard drives and things on bases, the situational awareness, of course, goes to, there's no situational awareness if you're wearing porns with your headphone and you're sitting in your barracks.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's continually feeding it. And people have porn addictions, porn violence addictions, just like they have addictions to drugs and alcohol and sugar and things. It takes a lot of work to really extract yourself from that. Mm-hmm. And your children will pick it up. People think, oh, well, I'm just doing it in this room, and they don't know, right? On an etheric level, they will pick up. Mm-hmm. What is your father or your mother looking at? What do they think is cool? Mm-hmm. What do they comment on? Children pick it up early on, and then it passes on generation to generation. Child doesn't even know why. Mm-hmm. Just like the jihadi or the Islamic or criminal network ideology passes on, so does this other. Sorry if that's mine.
Another interesting thing about what you're talking about, what we've been talking about as far as the spiritual aspect of perception, life in general, it seems to me that American people are checking into that too right now. At least it seems to me. Like, mm-hmm. Let's say, like, I don't want to get into politics too deep, but Donald Trump's, he gets shot, he does his fight thing, and instantly they start tapping into this divine intervention, and mm-hmm. And not that it didn't seem sincere to me, it did, okay, but when he comes out and says it changed me, and I don't know why it changed me, but I feel something different. And then people overwhelmingly like that. And seems to me that people are overwhelmingly talking out loud about God again. And it's going on social media in a way in which I don't feel like it has been in the last, elbow squeaking, in the last, let's say, decade or even decade plus. I feel like more, and I also feel like more influencers, predominantly probably because I'm viewing these people more, but predominantly my kind of people like me, influencing like me, warriors, people have been to war and seen that and still understand that there's a light and a dark kind of going on. And a lot of them even, being Christian or whatever belief that they have, being forward about that and saying, I don't really care what you think about me. This is what I believe. This is what my family believes. This is what my mm-hmm. culture believes. And I stand behind those beliefs. They're foundational to me. And it's like, if you're influencing people and you can stand firm in that today, it's impacting people, I feel like, more than what it was without that. I feel like it's mm-hmm. more now than it has been. Do you think that's accurate? Or is it just because of what I'm consuming?
Oh, I share your perception. I don't know, have you ever been near death? Have you ever been shot or injured to a point where, I mean, I have, where I had a near-death experience, and it definitely changes you. I mean, let me put it this way, it could change you. Not saying it would change everybody, but and because the people who plotted these assassination attempts wanted it to be on media for the dark side, a sacrifice, if you will. And it didn't happen that way. You could say by whatever you call a deity or higher than yourself. You know, there's all names in all different languages, but you could say the hand of God was shown. Now, what you do with that, that's up to you. But I do think more people all of a sudden got shook up a bit in a positive way. You know, whoa. And I hope it continues.
Yeah. Me too. I think that, well, I don't know anything. I'm nobody. However, the way I feel is different now than the way I was raised. I was raised Protestant, Nazarene even, which I don't think is a bad foundation. I don't. But I feel different, you know. Done 2 wars since there, married 2 women, had 3 kids, had some experience now, you know, throughout my life. And I almost feel like Avatar had it right, as stupid as that sounds. But I feel like you have the ability, you have that free will, and you have, you know, darkness, and you have light, and then you have a shard of divinity, and you can choose what you do with that. You could shine the light through it, and then you could not shine the light through it, and it can be the antithesis of the light. And every one of us has something like that, is what I feel like. And we got to make sure that the light stays more, you know, we got to bring more light than darkness, or else things just tend to descend into chaos pretty freaking quick. And so, you know, I don't know where that comes from or why I feel that way, other than it can't all be a one-size-fits-all amongst all the different cultures on the globe. I know that it can't all be one story. They can't all understand that the same as I understand mine. And that's where for me, it gets murky when you talk about Protestant or different sects of religion. It gets murky because it's like, oh, did God just damn the other side of the world because we're the only ones that believe right? Like, I can't believe that. And so that's where it gets murky. Anyway, we don't have to go too much further into that if you don't want to, but it's something that I'm often talking about in the garage with my group of people, trying to just talk about that, you know.
Yes, and I believe not having a foundation. I mean, this is what happened in American schools when the atheist, I forget her name now, maybe I've repressed it, insisted there be no prayers, not even a moment of silence in schools anymore. By showing children that's not important, you know, math is important, but no moment of silence or no saying the Pledge of Allegiance is important, that gives them a value in a negative way as well as a positive. If you did, many countries, they say prayers before school, the whole school says it. So even if you don't agree later on in your life with the religion you're raised with, having some foundation of, even if you don't want to call it religion or spirituality, but this is something where people can live in peace, and this way of behavior you won't. If you murder and steal and lie and, you know, steal people's property, you don't even have to call it the commandments. You know, your society is not going to be as peaceful or harmonious as if your people don't do these things. So even if it's a departure from an actual religion, having a foundation, I believe, is very important. I think many people don't have the opportunities I've had to meet people of other religions, to live with them. I've lived with Shia, I've lived with Sunni, I've lived with Buddhist, lived with Jewish, I've lived with Christian, different sects of Christian. Almost everybody in my family married a different religion within the sects. I mean, my brother is Marine. He married into a Mormon family. My other brother married into a Episcopal family. I mean, you can have in your own family people that go into different, but that doesn't mean you don't have commonality about how you treat other people and yourself.
Sure. Absolutely.
I do think you shouldn't force anybody, especially under threat, or like Islam, you either it's convert or the sword,
Yeah.
and the Christians did that during the Crusades. I don't think that's right at all. On the other hand, I don't think it's right to completely eliminate it from your society, especially from your children, under the excuse that you'll offend some other group. So why not have a moment of silence? They don't even have that done.
Now that feels like classical conditioning to me, just a long game of it. Just like I feel like, I mean, Peterson talks about it, but the humanities and the Marxist regimes running around our universities right now, bastardizing kind of higher education. And these are the future leaders of America, and you go through that, and you think that's right, and all your influential, impressionable professors are running that game. Yeah, you're gonna have a different nation after a while. I don't know how to fix that.
It's been happening a long time, and the Soros network is very responsible for that too. That's who people don't like to talk about, but that's very, very influential in every sector. The choosing the judges, education, politics, etc. Compromising people, intentionally teaching disruptive tactics. But what you said before as well, in terms of spirituality and not necessarily religion, but belief in a power higher than yourselves. This may be controversial, but I was in Israel recently, and I've worked in Israel on and off over the years since 1975, mostly in the health and education sectors. And we try and introduce education programs through there with all different sectors of society so that children, and most importantly, teachers, can see other points of view. But also they're military. They're in a very different situation than the American military, who's never had an invasion on our land except for our own civil wars for a very long time. They are continually under threat from enemies on all sides, as is Armenia, one of the oldest Christian countries in the world, from most sides as well. And so both their militaries, but especially in Israel, it's, even though they have different religions within their military, I know a lot of people have to get pumped up for, going outside the wire, or even working out, with heavy metal and really grinding kind of music. But you listen to what they're singing, religious songs. They're praying to God as a group before they do. And that has a different ethos then that goes in for why you're fighting and what you're fighting for. And it used to be in American military. If you look at World War II, you'd have a chaplain. Maybe people say, well, that wasn't very ecumenical, but you had somebody, even General Patton, not teasing, would say, please pray for good weather, or please pray to defeat our enemies. And that seems to be mostly gone from our military. On an individual level, maybe not, but
yeah, maybe it's
but not as
it's gone.
Not as a large.
Yeah, I know that. I only know what I've done, and we all prayed as a large, definitely the company prayed definitely the platoon bowed heads, and like the way my platoon commander put it in 2010 was, we knew we were going into a bad situation, and he just said, don't care what you pray to, bow your head and pray. I'm going to pray the way I want to pray, and if you don't want to pray my prayer, you don't have to, but bow your head and pray to something. It's kind of the way it went, and that was good. But again, yeah, I feel like it left. I feel like it's definitely a different landscape for sure. People are thinking in a different way.
Let me also give an example of how you may be influenced and you may not realize it in military bases. I worked on Ascension Island, which is essentially a UK-US base in the South Atlantic. It's not a country, and so they can do whatever they want, at least at that time. A lot of bad stuff goes on there. And the only outside communication that we had at that time, cell phones didn't work, only sat phones. And this was 2008. And 24/7 on the radio was British Forces radio that played 24/7 pretty much kill music, and 24/7 on the only TV station we had only showed war movies. And even after like a week, I found myself like dreaming everything was kill, kill, kill. Uh-huh. And a lot of the rap music, we're not even talking about for military purposes, I was astounded when I was in some of the schools here, even elementary school, the music they play as an entrance for parents dropping off their kids to elementary school was this horrible rap music that had all sorts of cuss words in it and all sorts of horrible imagery described in music. And I pointed it out to the vice principal who's up there, and he didn't even realize it. He goes, "Oh yeah. Yeah." I said, "At least have music that doesn't have words. Or, there's so much music that you could have, upbeat music. You could even have, reggae music without the lyrics or something." Sure. But the children come in and they're starting to parrot this. Yeah. And then they get, chastised, punished for saying swear words, the F-bombs, and they've just heard it coming into school.
Yeah. Yeah, that's insane.
This is American schools, public schools.
That's insane.
Well, it's an agenda if you look at it the other way.
And and all these actors are complicit?
All?
Most? Some?
I mean, I was in that world in a very minor sense. I wasn't all the unions. I was in SAG, Actors Equity, AFTRA. I was even in the Broadway Theater Alliance, because one of the jobs I had when I was studying at Circle Square, it was a great job, was being an usher and a bartender at the Broadway theaters, where you got to see shows going on day after day, not just one show, And I was also a special assistant in the days before they had Google scheduling. People used to have personal assistants. Yeah. And I was the personal assistant to Jill Crimmins and Kurt Vonnegut in their house. I won't go into that too much. And also for Nikos Sakaropoulos, who people in theater in that world will know who he was. And I had a good telephone voice, so I would be the one who would make the calls for them to say, "Is so-and-so here? Nikos is on the line, or Jill's on the line." I had to memorize all these people. I had to go sometimes to events and parties with them and be telling them who people were. They didn't always know. It was the most interesting job interviews I've had with Jill Crimmins. She would just show me all these contacts. She's a very famous photographer, married to Kurt Vonnegut, who most people know who he was, writer. World War II sort of whistleblower in a way about the bombing of Dresden. And I had some very interesting interviews in the early days. Now it's all done by AI reading your resume. But those days, people would in person ask you all sorts of things. And she had all these contact sheets of political people, of celebrities from all over. And she would point and said, do you know who this is? Do you know who this is? And they had to memorize them. She asked me about literature, about music, so a little bit about what the Foreign Service exam used to require. So I actually knew a lot of that stuff. And some of the other interviews I'd have for different types of jobs would be kinds of thinking exercises that give you role play or an example or a problem, and you had to answer what you would want. And I would also say that in some of the other kinds of training I've had training mates. I won't even see their colleagues for some of the stuff that came out of their heads. You might be divided into two different groups. You're asked to do things, and the people who wouldn't do it go to one training, and the people who would do it or talk about some really horrible things, they're not actually dismissed or cut. They just go to a different part of an organization to work. So you have all these, you ask how people can think that way. Well, you have a whole think tank of people who think. I'll just give you a tiny example of something that's not even that bad. You have people that come up and say, oh, well, one of the ways we can disrupt a society in Pakistan, it's a real story, it's open source now. Why don't we import all these Norwegian rats, which are not indigenous there, to the worst slums of Karachi, and just overrun them with rats? That'll just drive them crazy. I mean, you have people that sit there and think of all the most horrible things from a small level to a large level that you can do to disrupt society.
Yeah, that's wild. I know that we have think tanks like that. I would assume that most modernized countries and militaries and people are doing the same thing, though.
Yeah, that's always the excuse. And it's not always an excuse. It's true. Also, do you have to know what they're doing? So you have to, certainly during the Soviet time, know what the Soviets were doing. And having been in Russia in 1973, and then again in Siberia in 2011, 2012, I can tell you there's a huge difference in the society and in the way things are conducted, no matter what the media will say here. I also worked in Ukraine after Maidan in 2015, so I really, are you going to have a conscience or are you not? It's an excuse to say, well, they do it, so we should do it. Should you know about what they do? Yes. The best people to work against some of these really nefarious, even if you don't want to say evil, but nefarious activities, trafficking, biological kinds of weaponizing, etc. They are some of the most resilient as well as effective are people who have already come through that themselves. That's why you can't really teach some people certain things. They can read about it in books and pundits can talk about it, but they don't really know. Oh, it's just like, okay, if you haven't been in a firefight, if you haven't been around people who are trying to kill you, if you can read about it, but it's definitely not the same as if you've been through it. Yep. And then you can also recognize people, not all the time, it's not a science, but if you've been around some really evil people who have done terrible things, even on a etheric level, a lot of times you can feel it from them, you can see it from them, and your whole body, if you've been subjected to that kind of torture or whatever, your whole body will respond. A lot of children can give very reliable evidence, even though they're discounted sometimes because they'll say, oh, well, there's children, they're exaggerating. But if you know what to look for physiologically, even in Chinese medicine, people go through some very horrific, or even not even so horrific event. They will often turn pale, pale with fear. And that's how I identified one situation with the one young girl, is that I'd seen her in the morning. She had gone away at lunch, and then she came back and just completely, I knew something had happened, and it turns out something had happened during lunchtime, you know, or some of these children were being taken from school in these refugee areas, what school was, and they'd come back different, you know, during school. Their parents didn't even know, you know. That's done in a number of places. The administrators are complicit. They often get money.
How do you fight something like that?
Oh, well, this is what I was saying before is, for me personally, and for some of the people that I've worked with, that both living and dead, you know, that the, for lack of a better word, the power of prayer, the power of discipline. You have to know yourself very well if you're going to go into an area like this about what is going to tempt you or seduce you or compromise you. And you've got to know a lot of the tactics that will be used, you know, whether it's through drinks, drugs. Now they have even sprays that can drug you and you may not know it. I also think for me and for some of the people that I know that still work in this, we all, the ones who I've talked to on a person-to-person level, and we don't use these means to talk, you know, about these kind of things, is you, and even when before I was a Sundancer and during the Sundance, it's, you're called to do it in your dreams, in other ways. If the call is very strong, even if you deny it, it's like, no, I don't want to do this. Oh yeah. No, I don't want to do, then I'm put in a situation. Okay, all right, I'm supposed to do this. And it's, in that sense, I still use the analogy that's been used many times. Like you asked about, you know, this small group of people and then this big darkness. Yeah, but if you go into a room, a whole tunnel full of darkness, and you bring one candle, it will illuminate it. So can one person, even if on an individual level, I believe it's like a ripple effect. If you discipline your own self and try and discipline your own family about these aspects of life not to go into, not to participate in, no matter if the whole crowd's doing it, everybody's doing it. I'm going to go ahead and take a selfie when I'm 14 years old in the bathroom of me half naked and sext it. No, you don't do that in our family. You know, you get punished if you do that. And we've already warned you, and you don't, you know, you can even do it on an individual level, and that will change. Not maybe right away and not on a huge scale. I don't know about you, but when I was younger, especially in the Foreign Service School and even earlier on in my career working with programs through USAID, before I realized some of the agendas, I thought, oh, great, you know, we're going to change policy for maybe thousands of people. One program I was in Pakistan, one of the goals was to teach 1 million children, 1 million, right? English for special purposes, etc., right? That's just for quotas and getting money. You know, most likely if you can just change even yourself, you know, one person, if you can train effectively 10 people and they train 10 people, do it on an incremental level. And these days, I think with the generations in the West that have been trained, they've been indoctrinated, even though they don't realize it, that you don't exist, or work doesn't exist unless you're on social media and someone takes a picture of you or a video of you. But if you can find children, and there are in many parts of the States as well as other places, that don't have that addiction, that don't have that insatiability for notoriety, and can work in a important field of work where they know that they cannot have recognition for what they do. And I don't mean the CIA, criminals in action often, I'm talking about getting it, like the Sound of Freedom people and people like that, that really go in there, that you'll never know about. A lot of my colleagues you'll never know about, even after they're dead, because their families could be implicated. You have to find people like that, and that can be cultivated from an early age. I believe I've seen. You ever meet just like, and it can be even at a rodeo. I just saw this recently. Once in a while you just meet a child or a teenager. They're just so amazingly good. They're just so good. The way they look at the world, and and they won't do the wrong thing. So they won't even eat the wrong thing. They said, no, we don't have Coke in our family. That's not good for your stomach. So yes, there are lights. There are lights, and I know Joseph Campbell, Jordan Peterson gets it from him, and many throughout history have talked about, Native Americans talk about the two wolves in every human being. You can say, the good wolf, the bad wolf, however you want to put it. Which will dominate? And the answer is whichever one you feed the most. But if you want to go into these kinds of fields we're talking about to work in whatever way, you have to know about that other dark side. And most people don't want to know.
Most people don't want to know.
Until it's still in their face, and then often it's too late by that time.
Yeah. I think that most people would that I've talked to respond like, how do you even tackle it? And are you even going to be okay if you do that work, because it's going to change you? You're going to be different having to do that work. And it's like, kind of the same as you though. Yeah, but like if nobody does it, and I bet if they took your little sister, you'd feel different. Or if it was your kid over there that's getting enslaved and raped daily until she just expires, I bet you would feel different.
Or drugged.
Drugged. Yeah.
Well, also there's different times in your life. I don't often say my age right out, because some people will just dismiss, oh, you're too old, but I'm 71, and I didn't do a lot of this work. I did it incrementally in my life in different ways, but I was told by elders early on that certain kinds of work, even certain kinds of spiritual training, you don't even start until your youngest child is through puberty. It depends at what time in life and what situation in your family. A lot of people that work in these fields don't have any family because they know the danger. But these days, there's a kind of dark humor joke I think you can appreciate that we used to tell. The Italian mafia was bad. If you cross them, they'll kill all your male relatives. Your older male relatives, to make an example out of you. But Vorzakoni, that's the Russians, one of the Soviet big gangs, mafias. If you cross them, they'll kill you, your family, and everyone you said hello to. That's the difference in their code of honor. Okay. So besides your own personal want to do this, you have to take a lot of factors into consideration. But as I say, on a personal level, even if you think of yourself as an instrument of God, or just a tool for doing your tasks in life, if you can make that as strong and as, for lack of a better word, clean as possible. I mean, every day we get up, we have a choice. Some days
sorry.
That's right.
Turn that off.
Some days you don't succeed in everything. You slip, you go back to old habits. You have another chance the next day if you wake up. So don't expect you're going to be perfect about this, but just the striving to do it can change you. And we're going to be changed. It's like, oh yeah, if you go to war, it's going to change you. If you do this, it's going to change you. Well, that's part of life, is changing.
No, I don't think it's a bad thing either. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, I think America also kind of navel gazes a lot since the 60s about I mean, no other society that I've been in, and I've been in quite a few, thinks so much about themselves and, you know, yeah, it's also part of the consumerism kind of thing. Oh, okay, then you have to buy this for that, you have to buy this supplement for that, you have to, you get dizzy with all that and forget to go back to the essence of
Mm.
yourself.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, combat changes everybody, but I don't think for the worse, always.
Right,
But I
not
think it's an
necessarily.
awareness, right? Like if you never see what one man will or can do to another man or woman, um, then you don't have that experience and you're not awake to that. As far as you're concerned, it's completely out of sight, out of mind, and that shit only happens in the movies. But when you smell the iron from your friend's blood, or when one of your friends gets assassinated in your case, and several other people's cases, you are awakened to the fact that everything isn't rainbows and sunshines like the West wants you to think when you grow up. And people really will do that. And not only will they do it, they'll do it and laugh and pray to God after they do it. And that's how much different they are than you. And then you face that dilemma, right? That it's almost like, um, I thought my foundation was the way and my culture was the way, and now I'm finding that these people are the antithesis of what I thought, and they pray to their God about it. Well, that'll throw a loop for you, right? If you're not stern and strong in your belief system, or maybe it throws possible questions that can improve your belief system or give you a, at least a different take on it. I know that's what it did for me. I'm like, all these people can't be wrong, and damn it, some of these tribal people are more devout than any religious scholar I've seen in the United States of America. The people in the United States of America in general don't pray this many times a day, and they don't sacrifice all the way up until themselves for the things that these people will sacrifice about. So it's like, once you realize that, and once you see that, or at least for me, it was a shock. It was a shocking thing to me. Like, that really had to reset my foundational beliefs about me, about the West, about the East. And, but if you're never put in that situation and you're just here and you don't go see other cultures and you don't go around the world, you're going to believe everything that TikTok tells you in America.
Yes, I mean, you think you see them if you see them in films and TikTok and Instagram, but you and
Mm-hmm.
I know it's like, I mean, you can think that you can swim in the ocean by watching a video if you've never swum before, I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
no, you don't know. You think you know, which is even worse sometimes.
Yeah, that is worse most times, at least in my experience. You have way more than me, so I'm just gonna stamp that.
But
Definitely.
also, I was going to say that, if you as a child, as I have, and many others in the world have, already seen the dark side. I mean, that's what I was told early on in life, which really helped me psychologically accept what had happened to me and use it instead of being used by it to be
Mm-hmm.
a survivor of the violence, especially as a child, as you go, you can then identify the dark side and those deep, really cruel tendencies in some people,
Mm-hmm.
whereas others can't. And so you can use that as a skill to identify a ledge. Maybe you can't prove it right away, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I know that at least when people wanted to kill me, I can tell you that you can see the lust in their eyes, and the want to hurt you. You can feel it after you've experienced it, obviously. But now,
and then you can possibly, not always, but you can recognize it again. I mean, not only violent Islamic groups, but criminal networks, they use very attractive females and males, but, mostly males in terms of the killing, um, who to the uneducated, let's say, eye and experience will seem like, wow, they're so hot or they're so attractive. And they're so charming,
mm,
psychopathically charming. and they don't see it coming, that this is just, that this person gets enjoyment out of what they're going to do to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's wild. I mean, I don't think I say it's wild. It's not wild. I know it's real. I know it happens. I know it's been happening. You brought up Soros earlier, and I wanted to circle back. Now, here's the main question I have. If it's borderline common knowledge that he is in everything that he's into everything that he's into, how is it that we can't pin this shit to him and in some way affect change or freeze assets or something like that? Or is it the fact that he does it by like surrogate or proxy and nothing sticks to him?
Well, all of the above. I have to be careful because I worked in that network until recently. I didn't know I was working in that network until I got in. This has happened in different times in my life, and but it could have been stopped, like many things, under the Clinton administration. That far back, it was already evident what the Open Society and those networks were doing. I mean, look at how close Hillary Clinton has lots of pictures of them hugging. His son, especially one of them that was in charge of the programs I was in, they're carrying it on in an even more vehement way. I mean, they're already, but like many things, as I said, it could have been done earlier on, but there wasn't the will to do that. There wasn't. Too many people were making money, were compromised, liked the leverage. I mean, the Hungarians tried to extradite him. They kicked out one of the programs. As I say, I'm not going to talk too much about that. But from Hungary kicked out one of their universities and programs. They knew. Other countries have, but it could be done. But as I say, it's gone so far now. It's like Spectre. I don't think it's impossible at all. But wow.
But it's getting increasingly harder. Yeah.
Well, you're going to have a legion, and you're going to have a lot of spiritual armor for that one, because they're into really perverse stuff.
I don't even know what to say.
Don't despair. Honestly, the other thing is I tell people, don't despair. Okay, if you can't do something now, don't think it's going to. Have trust, if you have any trust in a power higher than you. There's been times, the world went through dark ages of centuries and came out with the Renaissance and the time of light. It's just your generation especially, and our children's generation, they're going to go through some very hard times. If the United States is to survive as the United States, founded on the principles of which it was at all. When I was in Siberia at the Novosibirsk State Technical Institute, and I was taken into the graduate department's international relations classrooms, and one of the classrooms I went in, that was back in 2011, 2012, so over 10 years ago. They had a big map of the United States divided into 6 states. That was the goal for 2030.
I think they're going to, God, I don't want to say anything out loud. Then you put
classical
conditioning on the big silver screen called Civil War. And what kind of American are you? And it's like, that's what this is. We're conditioning human beings in America to set for this.
Yeah,
it's the way I feel.
Yeah, it's projective programming. It's programming you preemptively to accept, just like all those movies about epidemics before, right?
Yep.
Or about war. A whole slew of new war movies came out, Pearl Harbor and everything, before the second Gulf Wars.
Through
It's
Disney World too,
predict.
I find some troubling,
Oh,
not from them, but from like agency stuff. It's like MK Ultra programs and things of that nature to control populations. Like it's weird that the CIA has bases in Disney World and Hollywood, or maybe it's not weird, right? So,
no, how do you control people? Through the
hmm
media. How do you reach people at their most vulnerable point through their children?
yeah, yeah. I mean, well, I think they got it down. I think they figured some stuff out. Um, okay, I guess we can move on off of that.
Yeah, just the fact we're able to at least talk about it now, because believe me, for decades, you wouldn't even dare talk about it.
I'm sure.
People just call you crazy or find a way to silence you, use lawfare against you, etc.
Well, you got to control it. That's what they're trying to do, right? So, okay, I have like 3 points I want to touch. Definitely before we close. The first one is one of the articles that you wrote about, and I might mess this up. Is it Druze or this?
The Druze.
Druze.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I didn't know if it was pronounced a different way. And I read your article. Great article. Very informative to me because I had never known about that. And so I had a couple questions as first of all, nobody that's watching this right now has ever read it. So if you can just give me a basic, 50,000 foot view on basically your article of your writing. Because it tells who they are, that they were underreported, being attacked underreported, not just in states where you find them, but states where maybe or countries where you maybe didn't know they were even at, or at least I didn't. And yeah, I'd just like to talk about that just for a minute.
Yes. The best person to listen, and now he has a podcast in English and he speaks English beautifully, is Mansour Ashkar, and we can put him in your notes maybe under YouTube. He just put out another video today explaining about the Druze. He was a special forces in the IDF too.
And what was the last name again?
His first name is spelled Mansur, and he's on all social media. And his last name is Ash Ashkar, Mansour Ashkar. I hope I spelled your last name right, Mansour. I'll send you the link for his podcast. Bless you. So, because I'm not an expert on the Druze, I've worked with some Druze, and I've certainly researched what's happened to the Druze in terms of what happened when their women and children were kidnapped and attacked. And I mean, the Druze, their historical area would be considered in the Levant, what is now, I mean, over 1,000 years. It would be considered now the territories of Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. But they're a very homogeneous group. They are spiritually based. Their own religion is different than Islam, incorporates some parts of Islam. And unfortunately, they've been targeted because they're considered, in English, we call them heretics or, kafirs, infidels. And they have suffered terribly, as have some other minorities that are in primarily Islamic countries, not just Christians. We're talking about Yazidis as well, and of course, Jewish people. The Druze are very protective of their culture. They speak Arabic, and they speak usually also the language of their country. So in Israel, they'll speak Hebrew, and they have a very strong but harmonious relationship with the nation they're in, with the natural world. And as I say, I'm not an expert, but I think what most people don't realize is it is underreported, and a lot of the same tactics that were used on October 7th by Hamas, trained by Hezbollah and Iran terrorist groups,
Mhm.
were used first on the Druze to a lesser degree, but some of the same horrible tactics. And some of the same terrorists that were proven to terrorize, attacked Druze villages, ended up being able to escape and ended up in Iran and then eventually back to Afghanistan. And one of them was the bomber that was proven, the suicide bomber at Abbey Gate. I mean, so this is what I mean. People might think, oh, it's over there. But then, if these people are allowed to be unfettered, yeah.
Mhm.
And so I have a chapter in my book. I don't want it to be too much product placement, but everybody says you have to do it. Because I self-published this book,
No, good,
Traveler
please.
Traveler Between Worlds, which I also read in the Audible, and has a lot of photos, even photos I was given permission to use from the jihadi sites we used to monitor.
Mm.
And I have a whole chapter about the Druze in that.
Heck yeah, shout out on that. You guys pick it up. I'm going to do another plug to your books at the end here to make sure that we get them all out there, and I'll let you speak to all of that you want. I want the people to get the knowledge for sure. Okay, Druze, being attacked, underreported. You answered my questions there. Thank you. The next thing I'll talk about is, we talked about it on the phone when we were working up to this, and I only want you to go as far as you wish to go, but I would like to talk about K2 and Martin.
Mm-hmm. Marty.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. It's friendly.
And how that went down, as you know it, and then just resilience. Your resilience as a person. From the story I now know, you've had a lot of things to make you a resilient person. But how your experience can be related to people who either are in the throes of trauma and tragedy now, or rest assured it's coming for us all. If you haven't had some yet, you're going to have some bad times, and to be a resilient nation, we need resilient individuals. And so I wanted to talk about your experience with that, and then coping mechanisms that you've used to get past some of these tragedies in your life, from your friends to your loved ones, if you didn't mind.
No, I don't mind, especially if it helps benefit some people. All right, so as I've mentioned, Marty was a mountain guide. He always wanted to be a mountain guide. I supported his vocation, his occupation, and even after we were divorced and went through a very acrimonious divorce, when he wanted to, K2 had been part of our life for a long time. I mean, he first climbed K2. He never summited, but the first time he climbed it, I believe Sequoia, our youngest, was 1 year old. Anyway, on one of those climbs, one of the teammates, all those people that climbed that particular one, Rob Hall, Gary Ball, Adrian Benitez, eventually they all died. But on that particular one, Adrian Benitez died, but he died slowly. This is one of the things that really affected Marty. I mean, he used to tell me about some of his PJ retrievals. And, sometimes he would say, oh, it's just meat. We zipped him up in a body bag and it's no biggie, But then at night, he slept walked and he slept talked. And after the first time on K2 with that death where they saw he had fallen, I guess. My memory's a little hazy now about this, and so Marty knew he was still alive, but the others didn't want to risk going down to rescue him. And Marty's search and rescue ethic was very strong, and it really bothered him because, they essentially had to leave him to die. Um, and then he went again. He went twice when we were married, and the second time I really objected. That's one of the first times, because early on in my life, I'd already had a premonition. Marty wanted to die in the mountains. That's a death he would want, but not our son. Not our son. Our son didn't want to follow in his father's footsteps. He was an artist. He always had skills since he was 2 or 3 years old. That's how he expressed himself. He was a natural athlete. He liked to help his father, but there's also aspects of that life he didn't want at all. He wanted to be a teacher, as well as a teacher in sports and a teacher in art. And anyway, so the last time Marty proposed going to K2, he had already guided successfully on Everest, but Everest is not as dangerous as K2. And also, so when he first proposed it, when Denali was in his junior year, I said because I was the only one who paid for our children's education. Marty did not support, especially an artist, at all. And it's expensive, California College of the Arts, because Denali didn't go to high school in America. So even though he qualified for some scholarships, he couldn't get the Pell Scholarship. I'll just mention this, that while I was abroad working for State Department and USAID programs, identifying all these people, especially in adversarial countries, to get full rides in the United States for their whole college education, I couldn't even get for my child, right? And I didn't make that much money at all. Anyway, I told Denali, I said, if you go, I'm not going to pay for your senior year because I don't agree with this. You have to finish college, then you decide. He had already done search and rescue. Denali had already done search and rescue in mountains in the Sierras in California and in New Zealand. He had gone after high school to special search and rescue course in the South Island, and Denali also the youngest to do a helicopter rescue internship in New Zealand when he was only 15 or 16. I mean, he knew the mountains, but not the 8,000-meter peaks and not K2, the most dangerous mountain in the world. So I gave him that ultimatum. I talk about it in my first book, the discussion we had. As a matter of fact, as we were walking through a graveyard in Oakland, a place where he lived near, that was the only sort of park open space we could go, and nobody was usually around in the cemetery, ended up kind of be prophetic. And so he said, okay, Mom, yeah, I won't go because I want to finish California College of the Arts, and I really want to be an artist, and I need this, and thank you. And I said, okay. But then Marty was guiding on Everest in 2013. Well, two things happened. Denali's best friend, who had been with him on search and rescue and then was about to go to medical school, and his job, they all had jobs in college that were related to sports. His job was teaching paragliding, and in a terribly freak accident, after his clients had unhooked, a big gust of wind came, and Zach was dashed against the rocks and killed. He died within a few hours. And that was in April of 2013. It was Denali's really close friend. It really struck him right before he graduated. And then in May, might have been May. Yeah, Marty it's all online still, in a very big fight on Everest between the Sherpas and some of the Western climbers. They actually got in a fight over what the Western climbers were wanting the Sherpas to do. It was a bit more complicated than that. I'm making it. But at any rate, Marty tried to get in the middle of it, and he got hit in the head with a rock and got a concussion. This is on Everest. I do think it affected him, but he, kind of Spartan mentality that he was like, I'm fine. I'll still go to K2. But he was already in his 50s and this happened. And he said to Denali, essentially, I really need your help. Because Denali at first wasn't sure he was even going to go after a senior. He said, I haven't trained because I've been doing my senior exhibition. We were talking about art before. Had to do big portfolios, and he graduated at the top of his class in CCA in both painting and design. And he was very committed to that, and he hadn't done the kind of training you have to do for not only just an 8,000-meter peak, but the most dangerous mountain in the world. And we knew from growing up in that community, you don't just go if you don't train. And Marty knew that too, by the way. But Marty convinced him he really needed him to go. And Denali was also curious. I mean, he wanted to see that part of the world. He had never been to Pakistan. I had worked there in 2010 and 2011, and Marty had gone there repeatedly for guiding and climbing. Sequoia ended up going up after they died. So our whole family's been in Pakistan. And so the last talk I had with Marty, it was over the phone, was, and anyone who knew Marty knew he had a very loud voice, partly because he was partly deaf in one ear. But he was just yelling at me saying, you're going to get him paranoid, and you just don't want him to be with me, and all these kind of accusations that weren't true. And I said, no, I just see that this is, I talk about it in detail in the book. I was still in Army training for the second time. I was going through human training at Fort Leavenworth. And in April, I actually talked to one of the Afghan trainers, and I talked to who had been in Pakistan. I said, I don't know why, but I just have this feeling that the Taliban are going to attack in the Karakoram this summer. And at first, he said, no, why would they do that? Why would they go all the way up to the mountains? And but I said, I want to put it in a report, just, put in a report that I'm saying, I think they're going to target some climbers in the Karakoram. I told Denali this. He knew a little bit about my work. He had visited me in Armenia, but not in any dangerous places. I wouldn't allow either of my children to visit me in dangerous places. And I also just had lots of dreams and premonitions that if Denali went, he was going to die. And I talked to him about this. I describe it more clearly in the book, Traveling Off the X. And I warned him. I said specifically, your dad may put you in a position where you have to say no. And I don't even want to recall the conversation here. I talk about it in the book. It gets me too worked up. But in the end, I said, fortunately, I was able to, hug him. And last thing I remember is he had very thick, beautiful hair, and I was just ruffling his hair. And I said, God be with you and be safe. And we knew we couldn't be in contact because one of the acrimonious things from Marty is he wouldn't let me talk to Denali whenever he was with Denali. He wouldn't let me talk to him over the sat phone. He wouldn't let Denali have access to email. He was till the end very alienating parent in terms of me. And or Sequoia, his sister. He wouldn't let either of us talk on the sat phones to Denali. So I knew that once Denali left, and there's a whole thing about the couple of days before he left, and there was a misunderstanding, and so we didn't get to see each other at the very end, but at least I had that moment, those few hours where I talked to him. Anyway, Denali went through Doha, went to Pakistan, met his father there in Pakistan. Denali hadn't trained, by the way. I mean, he's a good athlete, but and Marty had social media, and I also knew from the climbing community there's certain sites you can go to if your family, especially, that you can see where they're going and what's happening. So, of course, both my daughter and I were monitoring that. And most people don't know that the Taliban did attack in the Karakoram. Luckily, they didn't attack on the mountain that Denali was on because they killed almost all the climbers. One got away because he had gone to take a leak, I think, higher up the mountain when they came to shoot them, and he just stayed there and they didn't know he was there. I think they killed at least 8 climbers. That's when a couple of people who knew I had seen this before said, "Whoa, you were right. Why would they do that?" And I said, well, because it gives them a lot of visibility, right? They can get everywhere now. They can even get up in the Karakoram. They can get in the tunnels. You know, they did it and they got away with it. They escaped because some Pakistanis helped them or were threatened to help them. I don't know. Anyway, that happened shortly before. See, they didn't just go to climb K2 either. Marty decided that the training for them and acclimating would be on Broad Peak, another 8,000 meter peak. So they went up, summited. They were the first, and it was ego. Marty was father and son, you know, be the first father and son to do this. So they're the first father and son to summit Broad Peak that summer, beginning of July. And they came down, and then 3 Iranian climbers. They were young. They're about Denali's age. Denali was 25. I think they were 26 to 28. And Denali had actually befriended them because, you know, politics often don't matter in music and art and sport. Apparently, they're really wonderful young guys. And Denali had befriended them, as you do, and you know, when you're in close quarters at base camp and other places. And they got lost or something happened. There is a video. I have videos of these conversations that Adrienne Hayes, one of the British climbers, gave me that are not released to the public yet. But so they were called to rescue. They were called to rescue a German woman who had died. So Denali helped pick up that dead body so they could send it home. And then they went up again. So they'd already done one 8,000. Most people only do one 8,000 meter peak in a whole season. So they'd already done Broad Peak, up and back. Then they went up again to try and rescue those Iranian climbers. And they came down. That's 2. And I could see from the video also Denali's completely exhausted already. And Marty is kind of, yeah, he's not himself either, totally. And then they went to K2. I mean, the videos were recorded at K2 base camp after these 2, the rescue attempt and the summit. So now they're on K2. And this is Marty's 3rd attempt. It's like his Moby Dick, if you know that story. He wants to, right? And so he and Denali and Chris, an Australian who had climbed with him before, go up. Now, started to go up. They had been warned by the Sherpas. I'd also told Denali, because I'd sort of seen this, I said, if the Sherpas turn around, look at what the Sherpas are doing, not just your father. And the Sherpas would not go up. They said, no, we don't feel like the conditions are right. But Marty was really adamant. And by the way, this is all in a video that the Sherpas recorded after their death. So I have that too. It's firsthand what they said. And Marty apparently got angry with them as well. But they went up. They were up at Camp 2, I believe. They had a hard night. The weather was bad. And that morning, Chris, the 3rd one, because you need to have more than just one person going up just in case anything happens.
Sure.
Chris said he was going back down. And I do have Denali's last journals as well. So he foresaw this is going to probably happen. He knew death was around. And again, most people never knew my son, but he was a light in our lives, but also he was a real teacher. He was just so kind to everybody. And so even when we were going through horrible things about the divorce and his dad is doing terrible things, he would say to me at one point, I remember he said, you know, probably dad needs more love than anybody, and that's why he's acting this way. And so I'm gonna go with him. You know, he needs me. But at this point, Chris had gone down. So there's only Denali and Marty. Marty's in his 50s. He already had arthritis in his hips and some other ailments I won't talk about. Denali was exhausted. It was their third time in a few weeks on an 8,000-meter pick. It was a terrible decision. And Marty said he's going to go up anyway. So Chris goes down, and Denali was put in a position because Marty had said, I'm going up anyway. You know, he got in a rage, apparently. It sort of was like, you know, F you, I'm going up anyway. You know, it's his third attempt. He was going to do it. He told people he was going to do it. And I know Denali knew the consequences probably of helping his father, but he wouldn't let his father go up by himself.
Yeah.
And so they went up, and they usually have to call in at least twice a day. And they had called in the night before, or both of them were on the radio. At least Denali said one word or two words. And then they didn't hear from them in the morning. They missed 2 calls. And then the last call was just Marty. And he sounded very different. And the Sherpas had this call. And I believe Denali had already fallen. That's why he wasn't on the call. And Marty's voice was very different because Marty didn't want to tell people at that time, because Marty couldn't have gone to rescue him by himself. He would have died. And anyway, I have a different viewpoint than some of the climbing community. And I talk about it also in the book. But when they didn't call, then there was a big decision for the Sherpas to go up to try and find them. By that time, the weather had cleared a bit, but it was still quite dangerous with the high snow. They did go up, and all they found was the ripped off tent, and there had been a big avalanche. Now here's the difference in what you'll read online. Because when a climber, especially as well-renowned as Marty, dies, it's a little bit like the military, but you have a special operations guy who's also a mountain guide. And I think you know what I mean. The communities close in. Nothing bad can be said against the narrative of this was a wonderful way to die, and he was a wonderful guy, but that wasn't really the case in this case. And I have this on their video, they only found 1 pair of crampons, Marty's crampons and ice axes, outside the ripped tent. Now they both always put both of theirs outside. And the avalanche didn't wipe away that part. So I believe, and it pretty much shows, Marty was not with Denali when he died. And they've never found the bodies, so we will never really know. Even if we found the bodies, I guess it would depend on what kind of gear Denali might have still had, if it's still there, to know whether he died falling or he died in his sleep in an avalanche. Either way, they're dead, no bodies. There is a whole thing about that, and I will mention this. Global Rescue, which had been our family's insurance company for years and years, certainly for Marty, you know, people go, oh, didn't you get the insurance and stuff? No, because there was no body. They said, oh, see, in the fine print, you have to have the body, right? Even though it's official by the Pakistani, and you can imagine what we had to go through to get the Pakistani death certificate and all that. Anyway, and then a couple of years later, when my daughter was going to go, because some body parts had actually washed down from the mountain, and that was a whole horrific chapter in our lives. I mean, I can only partly empathize and sympathize with people who have seen their own loved ones beheaded, because a head was shown. It looked like my son's. It was on social media. Nobody warned me. And that's the most horrific thing you can see in your life, your own child's just head, severed head. And the facial expression that Mike Horn posted, South African climber, was of a young man in agony, the agony on his face. So my daughter went after that to try and see if those were our family. They weren't. But I also contacted Global Rescue and said, okay, now we might get the body. Can we now claim the insurance? And they said, oh no, it's too late now. It has to be within 90 days or something. Mm-mm. Damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? You don't have the body, you can't get it. If you have the body and it's not within their timeline, you get no money. So, I mean, and it cost us a lot we had to go through lawsuits. It was just, the after effects of that were terrible and continued it also happened with my teammate and with some other colleagues of mine, but especially with my son and ex-husband, my children's father. So much of what was put online was total spin. They didn't even get sometimes Denali's birth date right, or what he did in life or anything. And same with my teammate. There was a narrative that came out 30 minutes after assassination that was totally full of lies. That was a little different agenda from different organizations and agencies, but still, when you see, especially these families from what happened on October 7th, I have a little imagination of what it is when on social media, you see a family member or possibly a family member in horrific condition. It's kind of shock that you want nobody to ever have to go through. Mm-hmm. It's bad enough if you have to go to identify a body, but to see it on social media first, and then also see all the clicks and all the horrible comments people make. Mm-hmm. That was hard. I would say that, I think my daughter wrote a book about her going to Pakistan to try and retrieve the bodies. After that, I don't talk too much about her because she has her own media and her own way of doing things.
That's great.
Yeah. And, but she's written 3 books now, but this was the first one. And I was just in Ukraine working, and my father was still alive. She was very close to my father, her grandfather. And when she said she was going to go to Pakistan to look for the bodies how old was she then? 24-year-old who had never been to that part of the world, had been working in an office, starting her publishing firm, D'Angelo Publications, wasn't in shape. Very attractive young woman, and she was going to go with all these Pakistanis she'd never met before. My father and I were like, you're not going. No, there's no way.
Right.
But unfortunately, Marty's side of the family helped her financially, and Pakistan gave her a visa right away. I couldn't do anything. I was in Ukraine, so I contacted some of my friends for Overwatch, possibly. I mean, it turned out all right. And she wrote a book called Journey of Heart. And I talk about it in the book too. My father said, if you go against us on this, I'll still love you, but I'm not paying for your funeral. Oh. They were working together side by side in office. He goes, you're foregoing all those benefits if you go against us on this. Mm-hmm. And luckily it turned out, and I think it was her destiny to go, and she writes a book about it in detail. But after that, I think the first 2 years we were kind of in shock. And for anybody who has a sudden death, it's different than if somebody's watching my father die, that was a slow process, but sudden death, and also 2 members of your family. Some people would say, they just also for people, if they know somebody's had this happen in their family or a military funeral or something, don't be afraid to say, I'm sorry for your loss, even if it's just that, or condolences. A lot of people would say to other people, I would see them. People who had known us, who had known Denali since he was a child, would avoid us or avoid me. And I said, why? And they said, oh, well, it's going to be too emotional. They just don't know what to say. Well, not saying anything is almost worse. And I think there, as well as the community's closing in on me, don't say anything. This is what we're putting out in the media. Mm-hmm. made it more complicated. And that's when I also decided, I mean, my daughter wanted to get closer. And so I definitely changed my work. So at that point, she came and visited me in Borneo for the first time when I was working in the jungles there. It was her first time that was before Pakistan. I'm sorry, it was 2014. And after that, she went to Pakistan. But it's hard also on the ones who are left behind, because if there's unresolved issues, I think it takes cooperation of other members of the family, and we didn't have that. There was still the animosity between the two families as well. I made sure that there were 2 memorial services, one in California so the Schmidts could come, and one in Texas. And do you know that neither grandparents came to either one of their grandsons, even if they didn't like Marty, they didn't come. You know, no family, very few family. One of my brothers and one of Marty's sisters came to the one in California, but you know, the animosity continued after this. Which I think if you have family support, it makes it a lot easier. Not that it's ever easy.
You mean the coping with the
Yeah,
loss?
the coping right after the loss. I luckily had a community. I had my military colleagues. And that's why, you know, I mean, my teammate that I trained with at Fort Leavenworth, and her father was Afghan, and she was just a remarkable person. She was a Coast Guard vet as well as a DAC. We were in a DAC program, Department of Army Civilians, for those who don't know what a DAC is. And she came to Borneo to help me, both with a project and also personally. And she was a deep person of faith. And I think even if you don't have your biological family, if you have other people, my military, still my vet colleagues, they're great. I mean, I have a trainer, I talk about him. I guess you'll mind, Rick. You know, he's retired, Army colonel, was a Green Beret, was one of my trainers, and his family, I know his family, and he's helped me in many countries. If I've called and said, look, in fact, when I was in Siberia, other places, I'm in this situation, what do you think I should do? So if you have that kind of support for those people who are orphans or estranged from their family, your veteran colleagues can really help you. And luckily, I was already a Chinese medical practitioner. We don't have hours and hours to talk about how I did that training. And my specialty, ironically, in a way, was post-trauma. But I also had great Chinese medicine colleagues from China originally, who had escaped from China, who were able to help me with acupuncture, TCM, and just general counseling. And one of my greatest mentors, based out of Texas, he also told me, write this out, you know. Yeah. I'd always written technical writing and I'd written poetry, but writing the narrative of my own life and own experiences, I hadn't done. And that helped a lot. I also was numb. I talk about this a little. I was numb for a while. I mean, that's pretty common. You have to understand, when this happened, I just turned 60, and I didn't drink. I wasn't into drugs or any of the unhealthy ways of coping that way. I still was doing martial arts at that point, and also when I got offered to go through these programs funded by the State Department or USAID, I always worked through contracting agencies. Yeah. That's also how they cash the money. But it's also in some countries so that the countries don't think it's from this organization. They think it's from an education, you know. So I talked to my daughter and I said, look, I have, especially after Lisa was killed the second time I was in Afghanistan, we were always working in the field at that point, outside the wire every day. I, yeah, so I sort of became numb, and I kept applying for other jobs in the United States or less dangerous places, but mostly because of my age. I wouldn't get them, but oh, well, we don't have this job, but by the way, we have a job at NKC in Kabul.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so I worked for a lot of the biggies, BAE, Raytheon, smaller ones like SOSI and Chechi and other contracting agencies, getting more and more. The first years, I think, to cope, try and not have too much other responsibility, to take care of yourself, make sure you're sleeping. I found myself, when I was treating other people for post-traumatic reactions like insomnia and
Yeah.
addictions and things, it's just my nature. I guess I felt better too, at least I could help them. But I did neglect myself a little in terms of treating myself. And I didn't have anybody to exchange treatments with on most of those places I was. And then in terms of recovering, so then when Lisa was killed, and again, I describe it in my first book. Oh, that was really hard to have to stay afterwards when you knew it was an inside job and people around you, some of them had been complicit, the fear.
I'm sure that's real, yeah.
And not to compartmentalize. I mean, if you've seen some pictures of some of the people I had to interact with, they definitely wanted to kill me. They'd already killed Lisa. But there, from the grace of God, I call it go on. I've been in a lot of situations where, Lord knows, I should have been probably killed. So I kept, and that's where I really went deep in my faith, and I actually talked to some people when I went to Iraq the first time at the end of the Daesh ISIS massacres, the end of 2017. I got offered a job at the Catholic University in Arbil, in Ankawa. It wasn't in Arbil, in Ankawa, the Christian neighborhood. Again, I'm around people who have suffered so much worse than I and survived and have an incredible attitude. I'll give one tiny example if we have time. I mean, I was teaching in this, we taught a special summer course that we opened up to the Kurdish community, not just the Christian community. Unfortunately, some other people got in. That's a whole nother story about how people infiltrate. But it was supposed to be for university entry level. You have to remember, all these children in these conflict areas, a lot of them don't go to school for years because of what happens. And the youngest we were going to take was senior in high school. And they had to have some English because this is an academic program. They had to know English. And the chancellor, who's from that area, but a dual citizen of New Zealand, calls me in and says, well, I had him on my rolls, this young boy that was only 15 and could hardly speak any English. And I said, we already had waiting lists to get in because they offered this course for free for the community. And he said, no, you have to take him. I guess somebody had wasta, had pull and said, you have to take him.
Sure.
And I said, okay, but on the condition that he can't hold the whole class back, he's really going to have to keep up, or I'm going to have to let him go because we have so many people that need this. And he didn't tell me about his background so much. He just said he'd come from Mosul and he had survived, and please, give him a chance.
Yeah.
I love to be proved wrong in certain kinds of circumstances. And so I told this young man in pretty firm terms through a translator, because he spoke, his first language is Aramaic, it's Syrian.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, everybody who I worked with there, they spoke 3 or 4 languages: Assyrian, Arabic, Kurdish. English was usually their 4th language.
Wow.
So I knew he's really, capable, smart young guy, but still, English is a whole different alphabet, etc. Anyway, I told him the conditions. He said yes. I saw within the first week, he had already learned the alphabet. He was already listening. He was trying. And I said at the end of the first week, look, do you think you can keep up? I can give you extra lessons. I see you're really trying, you know? And he said, I can do it. I survived the siege of Dash. He told me some of the things that had happened, that he had witnessed, that he had seen. He said, if I can get through that, I can learn English, you know? And as I say, and he did. He didn't get an A, but he did very well. And he was a shining example to me of resilience and motivation. And I've met, especially young people, but people of all ages in all parts of the world that I've worked in that are deeply strong, deeply good, amazing resilience. So that also helps when you personally see. And it's not just an amputated limb that you can see like this. I mean, this boy didn't physically have any scars that you could see. He did on other parts of his body, but that have the, you know, what do they call them now? Moral wounds or emotional trauma, the terrible nightmares they have, but they do get through it. And it also takes time. I think in this case, you know, we were around a very strong community of faith. I mean, these people, and the bishop there had let a lot of the survivors sleep in the church pews and out on the lawn. I mean, they had so many coming. There was no, I lived down from one of the refugee camps, but not all of them, you know, were large enough to accommodate all of the people coming through. And that's why I say sometimes I think in America, it's not, you know, of course it's real, post-trauma, not just from war, from many different, from crime, from sudden loss, from the threat of crime, from seeing your children go through pain. There's lots of ways, you can have post-trauma. And so after that, and after I got through the second time working in Kurdistan, and we all had to leave very quickly in March 2020 because of pandemic restrictions. And the job I got, I had to get another job quickly. I have to keep working. It was in remote Alaska with the Yupik communities, and we had pandemic restrictions. I got there at the end of March 2020. Everything was shutting down. No, there was only one gym in Bethel anyway, but the churches were closed. The gym was closed. The usual outlets I might have had were closed. A lot of stuff was going on remote. It was dark 24 hours of the day during winter. I was very isolated, and that's when I realized I was experiencing some pretty serious post-trauma reactions myself. And I knew that I wasn't near my usual, even though I talked to my mentors and people on the phone, it wasn't the same. And the screens are not really the same. I mean, they help, but so I decided to be proactive. And some other veterans, I had met one U.S. Army female veteran who had gone through a different program, but using plant medicines, that's what we call them now, you know, in Costa Rica. And then I got connected with, well, first, both Mighty Oaks and Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, but Veterans Treatment Solutions responded quicker. And you know, months were going by, and I was going, I really do need to try a different strategy. I wasn't doing my Qigong. Oh, I should mention, before I went back to Iraq the second time, I did go train with the Shaolin up in China.
Oh, no way.
In that mountain. Yes.
How was that?
Fantastic. I mean, that alleviated a lot from the previous, especially witness drama in Iraq, where I just saw a lot of stuff, and I even reported stuff. And as I say, I reported at one point to the consulate, and I realized that those people were complicit in some of the stuff going on. And also when, especially with young children, when you see that being done and you can't do anything because if you do, not only you, but the people around you are probably going to have terrible reprisals, especially people that live there and can't leave like we can.
Yeah.
And that's when my Chinese, and also my arm I had to have, when I got hit by the car, I had to have my, glenoid process down to my elbow, shoulder down to my elbow replaced with arthroplasty.
Oh my
And a number of other injuries. And I didn't take any painkillers because I was counseled to do that by my Chinese doctors. They were right. Your body heals faster. It's hard, but you can do it. But I felt, because I was working more sedentary in jocks and other places, that my arm was stiffening up again. And I was told by the orthopedic surgeon I would never have more than 70% use of this arm. And I talked to my Chinese medical doctors and they said, no, there is a way. Oh, and then they said I was going to have another operation in 2018. And I said, no way, it's going to put me out for months. And, I don't think, there must be another way. And they said, yeah, there's another way. But it's going to be hard, and we can give you an introduction. We'll see what they say, and don't go to the commercial part that most people do for martial arts training and kung fu. We know a place that's way up in the mountains, and go to the winter training. Counterintuitive. It's the hardest training because there's no heat and
Sure.
Up in the mountains, but that will do it. And you won't need the operation if you do what they say, if you train. And so they gave me the letter of introduction, and long story short, I got the visa. I could only go 2 months at a time as an American then. I don't even think you can go that long now. I went through 2018 to 2019. I talk about it extensively in chapters in my new book, and I was able to take photos, and I ended up being one of the health practitioners for them. Like, once they saw I could do acupuncture, and ended up teaching some of the Shifus and others English as well in exchange for my single room.
Yeah. You just lived with another family while you were there?
Oh no, it's residential training. It's 600 children, and I lived in the real place with the warrior monks. Yeah. And I explained, you could never do it here because of all the lawsuits they have. That's part of the reason, and I gave them permission to push my shoulder back every day against a wall and do all these I was in amazing shape by the time I left after 5 months. And
wow.
Yeah, so I explained those in the book. I also went to Thailand for strength training, and because I was part of the time in the winter in China, then went to Thailand for a month while I was waiting on my visa. But some Israelis had a very good Pilates yoga for strengthening, stretching, which is what I needed in the warmth for 1 month, and then I went back to China for another 2 months.
Wow.
And as I'm 95% at least, I'm without an operation, without any painkillers. So that's what I mean. I can say firsthand knowledge. A lot of these things work. And some of my friends, because at the time I turned 66 when I was in China, I went when I was 65, they go, why would you do that? Why would you subject yourself to that? And it's one of the best things I've ever done. And again, there's amazingly good, deeply good, strong, amazing people and children in every part of the world I've been in, but especially, as I say, Siberia and China, which are much maligned by the media. They're not their government. They don't, I won't speak entirely for them, but they certainly don't agree with their governments either, what they're doing to them. But some of the healing modalities they have in those countries that we don't have available to us, or they're denigrated, or you'll get a lawsuit they still use corporal punishment in both Russia and China and even Malaysia. Not even punishment, I would say for training, I'll explain it. I explain in the book, I won't take a lot of time, but methods that people here would say, oh, in fact, some people even said to me, oh, that just sounds cruel what they're doing to you and the children. No, to get yourself into splits, to get yourself to run faster, all these things, at first, sometimes maybe, certainly me, or some of the children might be moaning a bit or even crying. And then 5 minutes later, when they're doing the splits and doing back bends and all these things, and their time after lunch, they're just laughing. They're having a good time.
Yeah.
And they're capable because of those training methods.
Absolutely.
And as I pointed out in a previous podcast I did with Doron Kedar from Israel, you have, when we talk about the light, you have examples of thousands of years of training that certainly the Chinese and Native Americans and others have had that work.
Yeah.
One way to have children be really good and capable and protective of others, and then you have violent extremists and criminal networks and other trainings that do the opposite.
Right.
But they are both available on this earth if you look and if you commit. I saw everyone. Part of the reason, even sometimes I was saying to myself, oh, God, I just don't think I can do this. And then I look over and see a 10-year-old doing something. I go, okay, I guess I can try. But, is that it's a mindset as well. What can you cope with?
Sure.
If you're told, yeah, you can't cope with this loss, it is a terrible thing to lose your child, no matter what age. But people throughout all ages have had to deal with this. And there are so many different therapies, a range of therapeutics and treatments you have, especially in the West.
Sure.
So I'll cut to that after I got back from China, and I was in a really good place mentally, physically, and then I went back to Iraq, and then I went to remote Alaska. And some other things there happened that I saw that I just couldn't believe with the Yupik, what they were doing to Yupik and Chupik
What are you talking
communities.
about? Yupik and Chupik? I'm not tracking.
It's what most people think of as the Athabascan is only the Eskimos, but I worked in the Yupik and Chupik, other tribes not as large as the Athabascan, yeah. And it was a bilingual district, pretty much everybody was Yupik, there spoke Yupik. I talk about in a whole chapter in the book with photos. And again, I was given permission by the Shifus to take some photos.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why also my Chinese doctors, when I got back, said, you should write about this because nobody's really written about this, has been given the privileges you have, especially as Americans. So all the photos I took, and I was given permission to take, both in Siberia, for example, and in China. That's why I wrote. But even writing wasn't enough at this point. And so Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, founded by Amber and Marcus Capone, they contacted me. I had to go through the paperwork and everything, but they were also the first ones to call me, have one of their people call me and talk to me, and we were on the same wavelength, and we found a time, and fortunately they gave me a grant. They paid for everything for me to go down to Mexico. And with a group of some amazing guys, like-minded, all different military communities. Mm-hmm. And so the ibogaine, the animal medicine from Sonoran toads and
toad DMT and ibogaine, ayahuasca.
No ayahuasca. We did the double dose of ibogaine, and we were also part of a research. I mean, a film has just come out, I think it's from Waves. Sorry, Vets, I should have looked this up before if I was going to talk about it. Anyway, a new film, documentary, I believe, that was just released at Sundance came out about this process with, I think J.D. Shipley's in it, and some Marcus Capone and some of the others. I went through that protocol because they were monitoring all of it. Was done for research as well. Sure. And then the integration before and after, I'm still part of a group when I can go, and it's 2 years later. So some people might say, oh, I go down and that's it. But I really believe if you really want to do the deep dive into some of these reveals, I call them revealers, not necessarily triggers and so forth.
Mm,
Yeah, it takes years, just like it takes years of training to be an excellent operator or excellent profession in whatever
sure.
profession you're in.
Yeah.
Is that enough about resilience?
No, I mean, I love it. Yeah, it's good. It's great news. I affiliated with a lot of service guys still, and a lot of Navy SEALs that, I think it's kind of like I don't think it's a secret anymore that the special forces are using these things. I mean, they have people paying for it if you're a tier 1 operator to go and have your coach and have your experience now. So I think it's definitely, look, plant medicine has done good for my life, 10x than what alcohol ever thought about doing or any kind of other medicine. So it's something that I appreciate that's out there. Let's call it that, at least. And without naming people's names, I've watched my inner circle, people in my inner circle get better at everything, at life, at decision making, at memory recall, God, they're not all like me. Everybody has, different things from their time, but like I have seizures now. I have grand mal seizures from my brain injury, and now I'm medicated, which is great, but there are things that help those things that aren't from big pharma, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And I'm all about, like, one of the things that I am about on this show is just this, getting other perceptions out there from outside of the box that people were born in or placed in by society, and just letting them know, like, you are there's other options. You're not tied to this ideology or this lawfare that's kind of put in place and outcast and outlawed a lot of these good treatments that have been used in both religious and ceremonial and health practices for thousands of years longer than our nation is even alive. That's how much longer these things have been, practiced. And I like putting that out there. There's a couple other service members that have prominent platforms that have been spreading those ideas and practices for the last, maybe 5 years, definitely last 3 years. It starts to get more and more as one person breaks, then the dam starts to flow, right? And you start to find that there's a lot of people that are benefiting from this that are professional people at the top tiers of their professions. These different plant-based, you call them. I guess that's the least, or that sounds better.
Plant medicines, they call them.
Yes. Yep.
You do have to be careful, though. I mean, I've decided to become a bit bolder, but there's still a great prejudice against them, and they're still trying to make it legal in the United States. It's not yet.
I think a lot of people travel outside the United States.
Oh, yes.
Short distances and far distances alike to do that. But I have a problem, maybe with our laws, and strictly because, like, you're taking America's elite warriors that are going downrange on your behalf and doing your bidding to affect an in-state policy that you wanted. And then what? You're telling them that even if they find something that is better for them than what you are offering them, you can't do it, and it's against the law, and we'll lock you up. And I don't like it. I don't like it. And as hard as you try to keep it away, it makes me feel like it works, and that it probably works better than what you want to tell me it works.
I'll caveat this by saying maybe it's not for everyone.
Sure.
But it's important to have those options for treatment. And it's also important for the families, because I won't mention members of my family have gone, but I know other people, when members of their family go, it also helps the whole family.
Sure. I think it's a net positive to that whole sphere of influence. Again, like you said, it can go the other way, and there's probably certain things, certain plant-based medicines that some people don't react well to, and some do, though. So, wild. 3 hours and 14 minutes. I think we need to schedule we'll wait until your projects are done, and we'll have to schedule another one. In the meantime, I'll read these books. Um, Thank you so much for coming on and being transparent and talking about things that I'm quite certain are not definitely not fun, but not easy things to talk about. Not easy memories to relive, and um, I appreciate that because I think that generally it's always good for me. I love this. I love learning new things. I love being informed on things that I would have never otherwise maybe been informed on some of it. Um, but this is going to help people. This is going to help people that are in the throes. I'm certain. And even if it just helps one person, it's worth the conversation. It's worth the 3 hours and 14 minutes to say, if I help one person, doesn't matter where they are, this was all worth it. This whole, all of this, everything I do, that makes it worth it to me. And then I find purpose derives out of that for me. And if I can feel my purpose, then I get through my day way better than sitting and spinning, not having a purpose, not feeling a purpose. So I'm super glad. I'm humbled and honored that you even, reached out and wanted to put this together. I would definitely like to talk more in the future. I don't want to take all night, kind of closing you down. We have Traveler Between Two Worlds, Traveling Off the X, Clash, Kismet,
Oh,
The
hold on a
Art of
second.
Skiing. Am I messing it up?
So it's a traveler between worlds.
Put it.
Can I?
Oh, yep, see it. You're in a studio up here that's different than my screen, but you're good there, right there. Traveler Between Worlds.
Yeah, and the photos on the covers are by my son Denali. He was also a photographer. Traveling Off the X,
Yes, ma'am.
published by independent Texas firm, Defiance Press of Texas, out of Conroe. Clash, my son's paintings are illustrating this. Poems from Conflict Zones.
Okay.
And I'll put up also, this is published by my daughter's company, D'Angelo Publications. My son had written it as part of his high school, Waldorf High School senior thesis, Zen and the Art of Skiing, where he talks about at 17 studying meditation and Qigong with one of my trainers in order to overcome his fear of what was it? Oh, backflips and skiing.
Okay.
And then the first poetry book is called Kismet.
Got it.
And
Where's that photo taken at on that cover?
Utah.
Okay. Beautiful.
Thank you. And yeah, I have a website with all my articles. I have a link tree now with all my social media sites, and I have a Substack. I'll have a new article coming out, usually the first or second of every month, with just more geopolitical analysis. But I hope when you cheered me up when you said that you read the Drews article, because I hope it reaches people on a level almost anyone can understand about these issues that I write about.
Yeah, sure.
And I really want to thank you for the opportunity. I've learned from other people's podcasts in the last few years. That's why I've decided, okay, I'll put myself out there.
Yes, ma'am.
Kirstie Innes, I'll call out because she was on a Jocko podcast early on. She had much worse injuries than I, but she had gotten shot in the face and she had her jaw and stuff reconstructed. And she was talking about her S's. I have also have trouble with my S's still.
Oh, okay.
And same thing that you told me, she was told. And I felt that too, watching her. I go, oh, well, if you hadn't mentioned, I probably wouldn't have known it, that was right. And mostly women, I would say, Iris Gardner on one of the Jocko podcasts, Sean Ryan speaking to Cody Alford, and I joined his Defy the Norm tribe for a month. That really helped me. That was another resilient thing. Yeah. I know, people go, why somebody in their 60s just, go, no, you can learn a lot from people who are younger than you.
Absolutely.
And your podcast, I listened to quite a few of your guests who'd gone, so I do think this is a much better platform because you can go long term. You can, if you ask the right questions, the provoking questions, which you can do, Yeah, I hope to help other people, and they can contact me through my website.
Yes, ma'am. Jo Patti. Actually, I'm gonna
X.
have all this stuff. Oh, I'm gonna list it all on the screen and in the bio. So just all you guys go check out that. When the ones of you listening now, drop down
Okay.
to
There's one other. It's from my family
42.
members. Fortitude Coffee.
Okay.
My cousin was, I won't say exactly, well, yeah, he was in the Navy and his wife was in the Army. They're vets, veteran owned, Fortitude Coffee.
Right on.
So that's the other project placement I'll put.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, listen, I've loved it. I've had a great time having this chat. I've learned a lot because this is outside of my normal wheelhouse as far as what I do. So I do appreciate that, and I'm definitely gonna I'm not gonna hound you, but I'll definitely keep your information. If I can ever be assistance to you, please let me know for sure. All right, guys,
Thank
that's
you
what
so
we
much,
got
Ryan.
for. Oh, no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say best to you and your family.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
thank you again.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, guys, that's it for Choices Not Chances on this episode. If you like what you heard, if you learned any one thing from what you heard, don't be selfish with the information. Push it out and share it out to the people that you know that it will affect the best. And honestly, if you don't know who it can, then share it to your whole sphere of influence on whatever platforms you mean to have your voice. We're going to keep bringing you great content throughout the rest of the summer and into the winter as we get through fall now. I guess we're through fall now. My life is kind of like one big bundle right now. But please stay in touch and hit that bell and subscribe on these channels, guys, and you'll get the latest information of new content that's being pushed out. Also, when you follow, it helps push algorithms in the powers that be, in the worlds that be, to get this message pushed out to bigger people, bigger audience. So like every other time, stay classy, and we'll see you next time. Choices, not chances.